I don't know if you need a copy. And if we have it, it's just.
It's,
I don't know who might.
I
thought that I drove there.
Well, welcome everyone. Happy 2022 to the first workshop meeting of this year at Northwestern Lehigh School District. And we will begin with opening exercises. Please join me for a pledge to the flag, followed by a moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And Stacy, please call the roll.
John Cassiano. Willard Delaker.
Here.
Joseph Fatzinger.
Here.
Todd Hernandez.
Here.
Becky Height. Here. Lauren Hunsiker. Here. Todd Leiser.
Here.
Rachel Scheffler. Here. Jennifer Senovitis. Here.
Thank you. And we need approval of the agenda. I think we have one change. Mrs. Holman.
We do. Late this afternoon, we got an agreement for Maxim Healthcare. We have a situation where we do need a nurse on a short-term basis. This is an agency that we've dealt with before. I will certainly describe it, but I am asking for the Act 65 exception in an emergency because we do need a nurse, and we will explain that contract, but it is item 5.03, which if you looked at the agenda earlier than 3 o'clock or so today, it was not on there. So I just want to draw that to your attention. If you could approve the agenda with that item.
Okay, hearing that change, entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Fatzinger,
Second.
second by Mrs. Scheffler. Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And we have an agenda. This board meeting tonight, this workshop meeting tonight is a little unusual. It has been advertised with the possibility of taking board action on items on the agenda. And we may or may not take action tonight, but if it's appropriate, we are advertised and authorized to do that. So welcome again to everyone joining us this evening. At this time, we offer courtesy to the floor. For anyone that's with us that would like to address the board, please rise, state your name and the township you live in, and address the board. Anybody would like to do that at this time? There will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting for courtesy of the floor. Thanks again. First item on the agenda then is reading of the election certificates, and I would ask our vice president to read the 4 new election certificates.
Got some sealed certificates here. They read as such: the election board of Lehigh County, acting as the municipal election return board for the Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, having computed and canvassed the returns of the election held on the 2nd day of November 2021. Todd Hernandez, Becky Height, Lauren Hunsiker, and Jennifer Senovitis for school director of Northwestern Lehigh School District. In testimony wherefore, I have set my hand and seal this 13th day of December 2021. Timothy A. Benyo, Chief Clerk of Lehigh County Board of Elections.
Thank you, Patsy. This is informational and procedural. There is no action required for accepting these election certificates. It's just a simple read. Okay. Next item on the agenda, kind of related to the election, is 1.08 acknowledgement of board membership list, and that is on your screens under 1.08. Do we need to read all these names too?
I maybe do.
Okay, so,
Want me to read it? Recommendation that the board acknowledges the following board members list: John Cassiano, Willard Delaker, Joseph Fatzinger, Todd Hernandez, Becky Height, Lauren Hunsiker, Todd Leiser, Rachel Scheffler, Jennifer Senavitis.
okay, again, that is informational and recognizes and acknowledges the board makeup going into this calendar year. So actually, we have to take that. While we're in here, in this item on the agenda, I would like to open discussion since the meeting we had last December. The reorganization meeting only had 5 of the board members present to take action and to discuss the agenda. And we elected officers, a president and a vice president at that time. And of course, we were held up with what we just did, accepting the election results by the election board in the county, who would not certify the election. So we rushed through that meeting, reorganization, I don't say rushed, but we went through that reorganization meeting with only 5 of us available to participate. And I would like to reopen the reorganization and at this time and run through the president and the vice president nominations once again.
Before, Mr. President, before we do that, I would like to, with the consent of the board, resign my position. I made it publicly known that I would take on the venture until the rest of the board members were able to vote. So I hereby submit my resignation.
Okay, we have to take action on that.
Yeah, I would do a motion to accept Mr. Fatzinger's resignation.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to that effect.
Motion to accept.
Motion by Mrs. Scheffler. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Hunsiker. Any comments or questions?
We're accepting his resignation as vice president. on-
Yeah.
He tried.
Who's the stickler?
Short meeting, huh? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. So that brings us to the next step. We need to nominate a vice president for this coming school year, for the coming calendar year. And I would entertain a motion for vice president at this time.
I'd like to make a motion that Todd Hernandez run for vice president.
Okay, motion by Mr. Fatzinger for Todd Hernandez. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Weiser. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Don't see any opposed, so got it. Once again, congratulations. Thank you. I also think it would be appropriate for that, continue that reorganization that we had with only 5 members, to ask the board if there would be anyone would like to make a motion for president.
I'd like to make a motion for.
Well, we don't have to, if nobody would like
Opposes
to,
it. Okay.
if anybody would like to make a motion for president, take your head, yes or no, raise your hand, then we'll let it go as is. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so now we're through that reorganization with a full board, and we'll move into curriculum and building issues. And 2.01 on our agenda addresses the COVID data presentation and the health and safety plan update. This, let me just set the stage for this before we get into it. Yeah. Take a couple of minutes to talk about how we got to this position. Again, when we reorganized in December, a few days before that reorganization meeting, the state came out with a requirement that the schools review and reapprove their health and safety plan every 6 months. Well, the timing for that, when it came out from the state, was a surprise to all of us. And it only gave us a couple of days to even think about that. But we had to put it on the agenda because our 6-month time span from June was up in that next meeting. So it only gave us a couple of days to think about it. And so we were forced to reapprove it. We discussed it and we did reapprove it, but it was only with those 5 board members. It wasn't with the entire board. So I'd like to bring this up again. I mean, I guess you can review this and change it and reapprove it at any time during the existence of the health and safety plan. So I would like to, so we put it on the agenda tonight so we can review this plan again with the full board of 9 members and see if there's anything we'd like to change. I think we're justifiable in taking a critical review where we are in light of all the experience that we have now to guide our decision making. And we've gained some valuable experience that we didn't have when COVID began 2 years ago. And I guess we're 2 months from the 3rd year of completing the 3rd year of this COVID thing we're in. And we have new experience. We have new protective and prevention issues that are helping us. And because of that, I'd like to ask Jennifer to run through the presentation she has to go through a history of how we developed this plan and where we are and what the landscape looks like out there regarding COVID in schools and especially in Northwestern Illinois. So please.
Certainly. I'm going to start it. Actually, Dr. Sosnovic and I are going to split the presentation and share it. If for those of you who participated in our town hall meeting, very similar format, but recognizing that not everyone was able to participate in that, this is a very similar presentation. We did receive a lot of questions about where does the data come from, what does it look like. So Dr. Sosnovic's first part of the presentation will go over some of the data metrics that are recommended to be looked at and what they look like currently and historically over time, all the way back to comparisons from last year. I will then also go over recommendations from the health network, as well as recommendations we have for your consideration tonight, including any changes you wish to make, as Mr. Delacour said. We do have 2 slides of recommendations on the end of this presentation. Should you approve those recommendations tonight, we will and are prepared to send a message out to our community with whatever it is that you do approve as potential changes, whether they are our recommendations or something different, that we're prepared to send that out to our community at whatever effective date you would like. So I will pass the first part of the presentation off to Dr. Sosnovic, and he will go over the first couple slides. Dr. Sosnovic.
All right, next slide, Stacy, please. All right, well, thank you, Mrs. Coleman. Tonight, we'll begin by providing a recap of our COVID data sources that we use for our decision making. The first half of the presentation will be, like Mrs. Holman said, similar to our virtual town hall that we had, if you believe it or not, in October 2020. It seems like literally yesterday when we wrote it out. I'm like, wait a second, 2020, it's amazing. We'll discuss how we gather and examine our data, how we apply it to our tiered face covering matrix, and conclude by offering some recommendations for our board to consider. Next slide, please. Northwestern reviews data made generally available to the public through various national and state dashboards. The data is provided at a frequency from every day to weekly. The data, unfortunately, is not reported at a school district level. We'll discuss how we come up with some of our school district metrics a little bit later on. Through our contact tracing procedures, we monitor building level case counts, and we look for classroom outbreaks. Additionally, we collect staff vaccination data and examine our student vaccination rates through the use of the public health information system that's made available to our nurses. Since the onset of the pandemic, several organizations have launched dashboards and tools for us to use and make decisions. The CDC has released the COVID-19 dashboards. They provide a national, state, and county level data. One tool that we have this year that we didn't have before are forecasting models. The CDC provides weekly forecasting reports that incorporate models by reputable institutions throughout the nation in an attempt to really predict where the COVID is going, how it's trending, and what we can expect in the weeks to come. Dashboards we rely on the most come from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. The COVID-19 data and early warning monitoring system dashboards provide PA level data from a cumulative perspective all the way down to a zip code. These dashboards are summaries of COVID data that's reported in the Pennsylvania National Electronic Disease Surveillance System. That's a state database where all the healthcare providers report the information up to the public health department. So all the cases that are happening regionally need to go through that system. One major shortcoming of the dashboards, as I mentioned before, is they don't provide that school level data, and all of that analysis is conducted internally by us. This slide will be slightly longer than the last, and I apologize to any of those who attended the virtual town hall because it's important to review how we derive our Northwestern level data. As you can see, Northwestern encompasses several zip codes that aren't entirely in our school district or even Lehigh County in that matter. If you look at the graphic of the 9 zip codes that our district encompasses, only 2 of them are entirely ours. If we would account for all the COVID data in each of those zip codes, we would potentially be artificially increasing our local numbers. To overcome this challenge, we applied proportions. Basically, we weighted the data. We examined the square mileage of each of the zip codes and assigned them approximate percentages of COVID data using conservative estimates. I have an arrow on the screen there, and that's Kutztown. And so as you can see, the majority of 19,530 does not reside in our district. So if we would assign all of that information to us, it would artificially inflate our number. So we estimate conservatively just that small sliver accounts for about 15% of that data. We recognize that the zip code, the information from that zip code could possibly come from that small corner of our district, but we know it's highly unlikely. The majority of Kutztown cases are coming from Kutztown itself and the university. Utilizing the data in this manner allows us to drill down to a more accurate picture and provide us district level data that decouples us from the Lehigh County metric. A key measure used by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention and Control and the Pennsylvania Department of Health to determine our level of community spread is the incident rate per 100,000 residents. On the screen is a graphical representation of the Lehigh counties and Northwestern's weighted and unweighted data for 21-22. This is all the way up through the end of the last calendar year, so December 31st. Also included on the graph is the CDC's defined thresholds for community spread. They have 4 distinct thresholds of low, moderate, substantial, and high. As this illustrates, Lehigh County and Northwestern have been above the high threshold since approximately August 20th of 2021. A second key metric the CDC and DOH use to determine community spread is the percent positivity for PCR tests. This measure reflects the percentage of PCR tests administered that actually result in a positive case over time. This data unfortunately is only available at a county level, and similar to the incident rate metric, includes transmission thresholds. As the graph highlights, the Lehigh County metric exceeded the high category mid-November. Between those two metrics are really how they determine community spread. Oftentimes, one may be different than the other. So one may be in moderate, the other one might be high. When that situation occurs, the CDC uses the higher of the two to determine the community spread determination. Every day we track, monitor positive cases and quarantines that occur within our student and staff population. Because we've tracked the data at this level since the beginning of the pandemic, we're able to provide complete comparative analysis from year to year. Before you is a comparison of the number of positive cases we had this year relative to last year. As you can see, we've had a significant number of increased cases this year. It's important to know that the positive cases that are displayed on the screen represent students and staff that must be reported by the Department of Health. Meaning the individual was on our school grounds during their symptomatic window. With regard to quarantines, this represents any student that had a quarantine due to an exposure in or out of school. For example, a student exposed to a positive case that occurred at a daycare or from a household contact or something along those lines. Investigating each case and working with families to educate them on isolations and quarantines is extremely demanding and time intensive. Honestly, we would not be able to keep up with all of it, and it's voluminous. If it wasn't for us having the best nursing staff in Lehigh County. It's through their valiant efforts that we've been able to stay on top of all the investigations and still provide exceptional care to our students during the day. Kids still come in with boo-boos, scratches, tummy aches, and everything else at the same volume as they had before. And this was on top of what they also have to do. So Mrs. Lingenfelter, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Schmidt, and Mrs. Beal, Mrs. Holman and I sincerely thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all of your efforts. Finally, we do track vaccination percentages of our student and staff population, as I mentioned before. The numbers on this slide represent what fully vaccinated meant just a few days ago. December 30th, when fully vaccinated meant 2 weeks after your second dose of Pfizer or Moderna, or 2 weeks after the single series of Johnson & Johnson. The current definition places time limits on the vaccination and also includes with it the booster. We anticipate that this was going to occur, so we waited until that definition change was official before proceeding with another staff survey. We intend to resurvey our staff in the upcoming weeks to see who meets that new definition of fully vaccinated, so we can update that. At this,
I have a question about the percentages in here. You say 171 are fully vaccinated from 184 responses,
that's correct.
but we have 560 staff members.
Approximately 560 people on our rolls.
So, only 184 out of 560 even responded
Correct.
to the survey.
It was not a mandatory survey. We requested the information. We did not require them to provide it to us.
Okay, so we don't really have a percentage in there for our staff, I see anyway.
That's why I didn't include it as a percentage format, because I didn't want to have anyone misinterpret the information.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep. But that really concludes my piece of the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Mrs. Holman to discuss our mitigation strategies. and how this data applies to our tiered face covering matrix. Do you want me to pause for questions?
Well,
for
that's what you
data
just said.
piece?
Do you want, can we pause for questions? Certainly before I get started, if you have questions on the data and where the data metrics come from or information on any of the previous slides, you certainly are welcome to wait till the end and ask them at the end. But if you have questions now, you're certainly welcome to ask them now before I start.
Yeah, I'm
That's
gonna go
easier.
to the bathroom and Ryan will field them for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in here, even for those of us who've been involved with it from the beginning, but I'd like to give people the opportunity now to ask
Absolutely.
questions about the data before we get into the next part. And if anybody has any questions this time for Dr. Cisnovi.
The survey you do for the staff, is it anonymous or do they have to fill out name and all that information?
We do ask them to put their name.
Okay. Do you think you'd get a different response if you were able to let them fill it out anonymously, or do you think it would throw off your numbers?
I don't know if the anonymous part necessarily drove people away from taking the survey. It's important for us to capture that, because as we do contact tracing and we're setting quarantine timelines and isolations and exposures and all of that, it's a valuable tool for us to have. It also allowed us to really reflect on our vaccination clinics that we had here, like timing wise, like, because one of the questions was, when did you receive it? And so when was that sweet spot where we would be able to capture a lot of the staff and stuff in what building? So I don't necessarily believe there was hesitancy due to it. Maybe a few people, I'm not going to say it was absolutely not, but I don't think it swung it dramatically one way or the other.
I could just respond to, when I am doing contact tracing with Italy, they are very comfortable in sharing their vaccine status with me.
Okay.
So that was back in September. Sorry.
Your mic and repeat into it.
They are very cooperative in sharing their vaccine status with me, and also sharing their vaccine cards. That survey was done in early September when vaccines were still a little bit more questionable, but we see people highly cooperative.
Okay.
That means
I'm
Filled
just
in.
wondering, it just seems like a high number to not have responded, so just trying to figure out maybe why.
that number also includes all of our substitutes.
Okay.
Okay,
Coach-
yeah,
our
not all
coach-
of our,
Coaches,
yeah. all of our substitutes and custodians and food service substitutes and teacher substitutes.
Everything.
I have a question. Troy, what informs the kids percentages? Like,
Are you talking vaccination, right?
Yeah, like how do you know who?
Through painstaking effort of one of our nurses going through that system for each child to look to see what their status is. It's health protected information. So we aren't given that unless a parent gives it to us, but we could go through that system and see who has got it from the access that the nurses have at that state system. And then they do aggregate tallies.
All right, great.
I have a little button on my mic here that I'm gonna. So if you
Sorry.
forget to turn your mic on. That's what that
We're out of
means.
practice.
So people listening in can hear what we're saying in. Sorry about that.
If I may, I have a question.
Yeah.
What are the current positive case counts? And like, how has that changed from before break to now? Do we have data on that?
Yeah, so I reported in the presentation 159 cases on our public tracker. Today, that updated shortly before this presentation. We have 171.
159 was when, Troy?
159 represented whatever I captured up to December 31st when we finalized this presentation.
And that's active cases at that point, in time, known active.
Yeah, so just so we're aware, the 171 represents cases that have, let's say, not occurred, it's not the right word, but they've been here during that symptomatic window. So it's what they define that symptomatic window is 48 hours. So somebody takes a test on a Saturday and they were here Thursday, that's going to count against us. We need to report that to the Department of Health. if somebody was last day was Friday, let's say, and they stayed out of school Monday because they weren't feeling well, got a test, 2 days back is a Saturday, they don't play any activities or anything like that, that wouldn't be reportable by us to the Department of Health because it didn't meet that 48-hour criteria. There are a number of positive cases that we've experienced and are aware of that have not, are not reflective of that number because it's not what we have to report. It's cases that are outside of here, whether it's a household contact or something, somebody was on quarantine for exposure, like I mentioned, at a daycare or something, and they end up positive. That's just not something we need to contact trace through.
Boy, you mentioned in the very beginning, this is an internal analysis that we do. We come up with all these numbers for our metrics, which takes an awful lot of time, I'm sure. I don't know how much, but it just appears with all the information. It must take a lot of time. And I want to go over to number 7, slide number 7. That's the incident rate per 100,000. And just ask you about the, up until, well, looking at the weighted and the unweighted. And I think that gets into the zip code analysis that you use.
Correct.
Is the weighted and unweighted for the district really don't drift apart very much. Is it worth doing that?
I think it does. I mean, there are times where you see it closer than others where it separates out. Again, it's just one more piece of data point, and the way we have our Excel, the way I have the Excel sheets all set up, we gather the zip code data and there's formulas that drive it all out. So it's not any more effort to continue to track that information.
And when we first started this, it was all plowing new ground. We really didn't know what we were getting into or how to handle this COVID. And now that we have almost 2 years, well, 2 years of looking at these numbers behind us, this incident rate per 100,000, where did that originally come from? I assume CDC or someplace like that. And do you think it's really a valid target to have in our metrics to review?
It originated from the CDC. It was then adopted by the Department of Health and PDE in order for us to determine what instructional model that we were going to move into. So if you can remember, not this year past, school year past, we were in a couple different instructional models. We could be fully online, we could be hybrid, we could be, full traditional. And so the two metrics that have, let's say the medical experts have landed on nationally, and I'm going to say just nationally because I can't speak that they're doing this globally, are the PCR rate and incident rate per 100,000 in order to determine community spread. So based on the level of adoption nationally by the CDC, the regional Department of Health, I'm going to say yes, I believe it. They're valid in what they're measuring. I can't speak to the thresholds, how they come up with them, whether the 100 at high is the right standard or benchmark that it should be. I do think the measures themselves in terms of what they're measuring is important and something we should consider. The actual transmission levels themselves, I can't speak to whether or not they're set at the appropriate level, but I think time will tell us if they are going to make adjustments in the future. If you could, and I say that because when this initially came out, there was only 3 levels of transmission. And after a year of being in COVID, they added the 4th. So I would surmise that as they being the medical experts in these fields, become more acquainted with the information, the data, and what's going on, there'll probably be further adjustments to these, whether they add or subtract a threshold level or adjust those threshold levels, meaning instead of 100, it's now 200. So, yeah, I do think they're valid, Mr. Gallagher, something that should continue to look at.
Well, up until November, we're kind of just a little above the threshold values there. And it looked like they might have been close to where we want to be. But now, look at where we are now. It's like 4 times up the charts. And I don't know if that has to do with testing and reporting or what caused it, or I guess maybe just from Thanksgiving through Christmas, we've had more incidents because there's been more exposure, socialization, whatever it is. I just wonder if we'll ever be able to get down into those below the red line at least.
Yeah. The interesting thing about what you're looking at too, and I can tell you from what information that we know and has been shared with us, you're really looking at the deviation between 2 different variants. So you have Delta that was a predominant variant for a while now for us, up until about that Thanksgiving time, that November time, when Omicron, hit stateside, and it is much more transmissible, and people are more easily getting it. And so there was a high volume, and particularly different populations, children, other younger adults that have contracted COVID. Now, COVID's made up again of different variants. So what you're seeing here with our understanding of the data is really the onset of the Omicron variant within probably Lehigh County, as we really started seeing PCR and positive rates go through the roof.
Everything we've been told about this Omicron is that it's much more contagious, but it's much less serious, or much less severe. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. More contagious, less severe, like the cold, like the flu, like everything else. So, those, I don't know if those thresholds are even valid anymore, in my mind, in my thinking. I just, they don't make sense. We'll never get down here at the rate we're going. And after Omicron, now we have Omiflu or whatever it is, and all these other variants that are coming. And as they progress and evolve through these variants, they're more contagious and less severe, so that the viruses can keep their lives going, I guess. They don't want to kill their hosts. Anyway, I just don't, my personal view is I just don't think this is very valid anymore. But we'll see what the rest of the board has to say.
Bill, I would offer, I tend to agree with you on this one particular measure, that this one number, like you, I think if I was looking back at where we were in October, I would have said, do we consider raising that bar? My gut here, or my opinion, is that it almost seems variant specific, right? So yes, Omicron, as this variant has spread widely, there is no doubt in my mind at all that this variant is hitting this country in a very significant way, just knowing what's going on in my work, what's going on around us. But I would also say, look at the stats on the CDC site as it relates to hospitalization, ICU beds, all of those things. So statistically, you're correct, right? I'm a stats guy at heart, and that's what I've studied in school, right? So the ratios absolutely suggest that Omicron is a spreader with statistically less severe, hospitalizations. However, given the magnitude of the volume of people who are coming down with Omicron, you're seeing a spike in hospitalization, ICU beds, and deaths. So yes, on a ratio, you'll hear people talk about ratios, and they'll say that the ratios are much less severe, but the sheer volume and magnitude of the number of people who are getting it is causing a spike in ICUs, deaths, and hospitalizations at a much lower rate, right? Percentage basis. So have to be a little bit careful on how we use statistics. As a guy who's been spinning statistics my entire career, let's be careful when we look at the numbers. But I agree with you. I would think under normal situations, I would say that red bar and where we are with our guidelines could be adjusted.
I just wanted to add that I do agree with that statement. And I also think that we should be paying attention to the PCR percent positivity rate, being that the major health networks have come out and said that you should be taking an at-home test, a rapid test at home. And if you have mild symptoms that do not require you to go to the hospital. So basically anybody who isn't having trouble breathing or having any other emergent situation going on, those people are taking rapid tests. So I also think that that's important to point out that your PCR positivities, I think did 20,000 PCR tests last week, but there's also a huge percentage of rapid tests that were also done. So I just think that we really need to be aware of the differences in the recommendations that the networks are making to really evaluate where we're at. And also the severity and the populations that we're representing in our school system.
I could speak really loud if I want to project my voice. Just with that said, Todd, I'm asking you this because you're the stat guy. Do we maybe change the line in slide 8 as well? Can we change that number at some point too? The PCR number, do we, if we're going to look down the road or even now to maybe push the goalpost or move it closer, do we, I think we should start thinking about what lines we can change to do what.
I mean, I agree with you, Joe. I think, look, where we were in October, I would have said, it felt to me like we could look at some of the lifting of some restrictions and getting some masks off kids, right? I don't feel that way today, sitting here right now with these lines of where they're going, mainly because of the potential here to spread this Omicron further. The numbers I'm looking at on my screen around patients and ventilations and all the things that are going on, and the notes that we have received as a board from healthcare professionals in our community saying, let's not get crazy here. So yeah, I think we have to see everything I'm hearing with my company and we're in the event business, so we're looking at this every day as well. We believe this is going to run very quickly through the population. The good news is it seems to be less on a rate basis, less severe, and we're kind of hopeful, honestly, that we're crossing fingers that this could really be the thing that causes us to kind of get away from pandemic and further down the road here. So positive could be that a month from now we're looking at this going, hey, this is good as we head into spring.
Okay, anything else about the data we're looking at before we move on to Jennifer?
I will. Go to the dates for recommendations. So, I think we got all turned off somehow.
I think just.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be really loud until we fix the mics.
Thank you. Look at you. Fixing my
It's on your daughter's description too, Mike. Yes. Dr. Snowy talked about earlier about everything that has changed and how much has even changed even as of recently in the most recent update. I would tell you one of the things that has remained rather consistent is the recommendations for face coverings. This is regardless of the order, essentially regardless of the data. And the other one I would add to this slide is also the American Academy of Pediatrics, but the Center for Disease Control continues to recommend universal masking by all students. You all know that we started the school year in tier 2, which I'll talk about in a minute. And at that time, we're essentially doing something slightly different than the CDC as well as Pennsylvania Department of Health was recommending at that time. We did more recently email LVHN for an opinion. You know that they are our partner health network, and ask them for an opinion, and their opinion has not changed, that they continue to recommend, at least in a high level of community spread, to follow the CDC and DOH recommendations and guidance for masking. This is probably, of everything we're going to talk about tonight, one of the only slides that hasn't changed drastically since the beginning. They have been consistent with their message, along with, I'll say, the American Academy of Pediatrics has been consistent this year for their recommendations on masking. Next slide is layered mitigation strategies. So we talk a lot about things that we have in, and I talked a lot about this at school board meetings. You know, masking is one piece. It's become a large focus, but we do have a lot of things that we do have in place that don't necessarily get as much attention or get as much focus sometimes. And we've talked about these kind of, you know, scattered throughout meetings, but just sincerely and they were much more, I would say, described in our health and safety plan last year. But, you know, we continue to follow the cleaning and sanitizing guidelines according to the CDC in all of our buildings. You know, that certainly has been challenging and a hero's effort for all of our custodians, even during staffing shortages, but we have continued to do that through this entire pandemic. You know, you've heard us talk, and this board approved directly before Christmas last year and installed over Christmas last year, the bipolar ionizers. They are installed in each occupied space in our entire district. And that was an effort that this board took to try to make our classroom environment safer, and not a strategy or a mitigation strategy that most districts have. Some other districts do have them, but certainly that was something that our board has installed since last December in an effort to make sure that we can maintain in-person learning for our kids. Distance to the greatest extent possible. It is not as great as last year. We do not have 6 feet in almost any single place because we have all of our students back. Classrooms are not built to have the number of students we have and have 6 feet, but we certainly have the greatest extent we can in terms of distance possible with our students. Hand washing and sanitizing etiquette. So certainly our hand sanitizers that we have, you know, throughout the building, as well as taking time, and sometimes that's instructional time, out of the school day to be able to make sure students and staff are, you know, washing their hands and have an opportunity to do so. And last but not least, this is one of the things that had changed since, I would say, the last time, not the previous time, the one before that, where the board had looked at this plan. You know, the vaccine was not eligible for students as young as 5. As you know, we did offer 2 vaccination clinics in November and December. And as of the end of December, pretty much anyone who was over the age of 5 who wished to be fully vaccinated had that opportunity. So fully vaccinated, as you heard Dr. Sosnovic mention earlier, prior to December 30th, was 2 weeks post your second Pfizer or Moderna vaccination, or 2 weeks post your J&J. For that age group, Pfizer is the only opportunity for that age group. And so it would have been 2 weeks post their second Pfizer vaccination. And so that time period came about the end of December, where all of our students had the opportunity to be fully vaccinated. I would also say some of this has recently shifted in terms of vaccine availability, not only for all of our children, but also boosters for anybody over the age of 16 has been eligible. That was right before the holiday. And then most recently, they also, for anyone with a severe or moderate severe compromise of their immune system, they have offered an additional vaccination for children as low as age 5. So that came out, I think, yesterday, the day before. So those are all, I say, mitigation strategies, some of which are in our control and some of which aren't, but it's not, I mean, we're certainly focusing on masks, and I understand why, but there are many things that we have in place throughout the school day as a layered approach. And we believe in that from the beginning, and I think it has proved well that we were able to keep students in school, that being our ultimate goal. There is, and some of you have asked about where some of the metrics came to on the tiers, and so I thought I would just go over. There was a metric that was described to us from the Department of Health. This comes from the Department of Health as a closure metric. These are 2 metrics, and so when you focused earlier on the percent positivity as well as the number of outbreaks in schools, these are 2 of the metrics that the Department of Health uses to close schools. And so they will recommend a maximum time period of closure of up to 14 days for that full incubation period. And they have 2 thresholds, which is where essentially our bullet, I'm going to call them 3 and 4, came from. we wanted to implement something before we would reach these thresholds. So if you see, the first threshold is 5% of your students or staff confirmed cases within a 14-day window. The only thing we changed essentially on this chart was we literally put how many students we have and what our thresholds for our schools would be. And then the other one, which is 3 simultaneous classroom or a group outbreak. So if you have a classroom or a team, that a sports team or a club that has 3 simultaneous outbreaks, they also consider that to be a potential closure metric. So these were the rationale for where we came up with bullet 3 and 4. We set the percentages, particularly for the confirmed cases, at 1.5 and 2.5, in the hopes that if we did start the school year, as we did in tier 2, or even in optional, that if at some point a building had a high number of cases and went to the 1.5% or the 2.5%, that we would institute masking before we ended up in a closure status. And so that was the purpose and the rationale behind those, so that we would not be forced to close schools and move to remote instruction. Sure.
I'd like to ask a question about that requirement for closing at 5%.
At 5% or the simultaneous outbreaks, yeah.
So on slide number 9, we had 64 total for the school, 64 cases
In December, yeah.
in December, which is, I don't know if any of those buildings that we have exceeded them or got close to them.
Well, I'm gonna go over
You're
that.
gonna get them? Okay.
Yeah, so I have them actually
Alright.
marked on the chart.
Apologize for jumping
No,
ahead,
it's okay.
but the, is this a requirement that the schools close when they exceed those numbers?
It's a
for
re-
buildings?
It's a requirement that we report positive case counts every Friday. It's a requirement that we do the quarantines of positive counts. And they will advise us, and did so on one of our buildings directly before the holiday, about whether or not they believe there is spread within the school that should dictate a closure.
So we are being told by someone when we have to close the school.
We have not been told that yet.
But
I don't know the situation, so the only other school that I'm aware of that did a closure was Bethlehem. They closed one of Bethlehem's schools early on. I don't know how strong they will come with a recommendation versus a requirement. Joseph, you want to add to something? No?
Yeah, I was just gonna
Because you
add,
had the conversation.
Yeah. at the 5% threshold, or if it's 3 simultaneous classrooms, we're required to contact the Department of Health and seek guidance. And at that point in time, we'll have a very intimate conversation about what's going on, whether or not we have the situation contained, because it may be a volume of positive cases coming up, and we may not be able to keep up with the contact tracing. They want to know our ability to function in that capacity. They'll ask us a myriad of different questions, and then they will make a recommendation to us as to what they would like us to do. We think you should close down for X number of days. We think you should do this. They do, though, have the authority to shut us down if they believe that we are creating a state-created danger here by having school open and there's tremendous spread within our buildings. But our experience right now has been they're going to just recommend our action. We need to make a decision on what is going to occur if it's within reasonable thresholds. If we have like 10% of our building going out, they're going to probably come in and use their authority to close us down.
Well, our goal is to maintain full in-person 5 days a week classroom instruction.
Yes, our goal from the beginning has been, and I have this somewhere later in the presentation, and I think the majority of our community would agree, our number one goal is to remain in person 5 days per week with as little disruption and as safe of a way as possible. And so whether the metrics are set in the right place or they need to be changed, I'm not really sure, but they certainly, I would say, are suggesting to us to do everything we can and prevent a closure. We had one closure, I would say we had a couple closures last year. We had one long-term closure at Weisenberg last year. In that particular case, it was not an option. We actually Had some long conversations with several levels of the Department of Health at that time, and it was not an option to not close. We had a couple high school closures. We were very fortunate at the time the high school closures came, that several of them, if you recall, came over like snow days, and the closure then was 3 days. So we closed the high school and, you know, captured a Friday, Saturday, Sunday kind of thing. And so they might have even not, you might not have realized they were closed. I mean, we told you, but you might not remember them as closures. But we had a couple at the high school that were 1 or 2 day closures, but certainly we had a 14-day or so closure at Weisenberg very early on in September last year. That was not optional.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide talks about our tiered decision matrix. So this is a plan that we put into place in August. The goal of this, putting this plan into place or putting the matrix decision-making matrix in place, was to add some science and data and try to use the data. We know that it was very filled with emotion and very filled with opinion, and we were trying to bring some level of data to making our decisions on why we were deciding what we were deciding about, particularly this part to face coverings. You recall this is the same metrics that we used to return to school before the order went into effect that placed us in tier 2 targeted to begin the school year. And currently this is the same metrics that we use to place us based on the data into tier 3 right after the Supreme Court ruling a week or so ago. The first 2 metrics, as we talked about earlier in detail, are supplied by the CDC and Pennsylvania Department of Health. And so that is the number of individual cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days. As you heard Dr. Sosnovic mention earlier, we track both Lehigh County numbers as well as our Northwestern Lehigh zip codes to determine the number of cases within our zip codes per 100,000. It's not a flawless system. We recognize people go outside Lehigh County, people go outside the zip code. There's not going to be a flawless system. It's just the metric to try to bring some rational thought to it. The new cases in 7 days is what it is released. It's released every Friday. However, we do track it every single day. So when you hear us say we will release the newest data on Friday, it's because it's released each Friday. Second metric is the percent of positive tests out of the number of tests. So it's physically the number of people who tested positive out of the number of people who tested. Dr. Hunsinger makes a very valid comment that we talked about earlier today, actually. It's not capturing your home tests. It's not capturing people who didn't tell you and decided to stay home sick. It's not even capturing people who were sick over the holiday and didn't quarantined on their own and did what they needed to do on their own. It's simply PCR or antigen tests through a network or a provider that runs through the med system Dr. Sosnovic talked about. The third and fourth bullet are the ones we talked about a moment ago, that they were built to avoid hopefully a closure. And so you'll see the first one is we consider the building case count, which is the same thing the Pennsylvania Department of Health is considering. And we built the metric to be less than 1.5, 1.6 to 2.4, and something above 2.5, in the hopes that we wouldn't get to that 5%, that if we were in optional, we would be able to pivot an individual building and say, we're going to move the high school to universal masking because they are now above 2.5, in the hopes that we don't get to the point where they reach 5% and they are forced to close and go to remote instruction. Lastly, we talked about the vaccination status. This is the metric that we consider, and with the opening of the vaccinations for eligible elementary students, obviously it's one that's constantly changing. If you look at the next slide, we actually plotted, and this is where the decision comes in. So let's look at where we are on the metrics. So as you see, we have indicators across all 3 tiers, which is why there must be a decision about the tier, because we have metrics across all 3. You recall when we put this into place, and this is written on the top of the metric, the CDC guidance to get kids back to school in person safely, they said you should consider the community transmission, which is what they indicate the first and the second bullet are telling you. Your vaccination coverage, which is the last one. Testing, which I know we talked about at the board, and we are not currently doing any testing in the district, and any outbreaks to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. And so the metrics were built around the things that the CDC indicated were successful in getting kids in other states and countries back to school safely. And so you will see in our metrics in both of the community spread, the first and the second bullet, we are in tier 3 universal, and the actual numbers for all 3 of the previous chart are there. The 765, the 533, and the 514 for Lehigh County and for Northwestern, and that is per 100,000. The second one is the test positivity, which is 26.1. The top metric is something above 10%. The building case count, when we released the presentation, we had all of our buildings in that 1.6 to 2.4. I will tell you, when we came back from the holiday, there were a number of reports that we got Sunday evening and into Monday morning, that if we redid that metric with who we had on that, in that same time frame, 12/10 to 12/23, that reported to us after the holiday that they tested positive, we would have 3 of our 4 buildings above 2.5%. We do not, to our knowledge, we track it closely, and sometimes this is the part where we can't really be public about it. Like when you say there's only 5 test results on there, that might know, we might know we have 15 pending. But in there, that's where you have to trust. We look at our contact tracing efforts to determine whether we believe there's outbreaks in classrooms. Did those 2 students that are now positive have outside contact? Were they at some other event? Do they sit next to each other in class? Where are the commonalities of where those students have class or sit all the way down to lunch? And our principals, I'll say unfortunately, have become masters at contact tracing and seating charts and looking at videos on buses to try to determine where kids are sitting and whether or not they need to we need to recommend someone be quarantined, and or if it is resulting in an outbreak when we believe now they're spread within a school or a bus or a team. So we don't believe we have any spread to date, and so we put ourselves in tier 1 because I don't believe we have any outbreaks or any classroom spread. And lastly, you see the vaccination status, Lehigh County. If you look at the Lehigh County number that was on that slide, we are in tier 1. Our staff, as well as middle school and high school students, and again, rough, they're not all every single grade level in tier 2, but our elementary students are in tier 3. And so this is one area where, because we have metrics across all 3, a decision needs to be made, and why I launched the message that said, based on the preponderance of evidence and the certain trajectory that Mr. Weiser talked about earlier, that number is not high, it's very high. And it is just the community is saturated. I hope that we will see a downward trend and a trajectory in a different direction. But right now, every Friday that comes out and it's higher. And the board around this table, every Friday, we send out the data and charts, and you see it the same way we do. So we track it daily, and it's certainly not yet trending in the other direction. I'll take any questions on that if you have them. I'll give you our recommendations.
Yeah, so Jen, so are you asking us, like, so I know we have the tiers established, right? We've been following that according to the data. So what is it that you could be asking us to, like, support remaining in tier 3? Like, what is the ask?
Well, I have them on the
Different.
recommendation.
Okay.
So my recommendation, our recommendation is to continue to stay with the tiered system.
Yep.
If the board would like to do something other than stay where we are, that's where I will need some direction from the board. Because right now, based on the data or the metrics, there's not really a path there. So on Friday, when that information came out, that the Supreme Court overruled or overturned, whatever the words were, you had just previously on Wednesday approved the tiered matrix. And so I had that's the option I had to go by. If the board wishes to do something different, it would probably either be moving us to another tier or removing the tiers or changing the tiers and moving to something completely different.
So I think it's safe to say at this point that COVID still exists. I mean, I think we all know that. I think we see it. We hear about it in the media. I think the conflict that I have as someone who works in the education industry, as I sit here on a board, is this isn't going away anytime soon. And yet am I one of 10, one of 9, qualified medically to continue to make the recommendation to parents to send their kids in with a mask? What I hear is we're still wearing masks and we're still seeing an increase despite mitigation efforts. So that may be an unpopular thought. I'm struggling with that, and I'm struggling with, when you look at the data, based on the data, to me, what is the best thing? Who am I? I'm not qualified medically to make a recommendation to continue to say to a parent, a family, whatever the situation is, let's continue with face coverings, because we're still doing that and we're still seeing an increase in cases. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. We've done some great things. I've seen it work both ways, both from an employment perspective and as a parent. And I can relate to both sides. It's what if in 2 weeks, a month, we don't see a change, and we're continuing to put our kids and our families, we're making decisions for them medically that we're not qualified to make. And so I just wanted to kind of say, you know, we're talking about this and we're asking to vote on something that ultimately we're being asked to make a decision as to what is in the best interest of a child. And I just, long-term, don't know that that's something 1 of 9 could necessarily agree to. So I'm struggling when I listen to the data and I look at what could be, what is good for one is not necessarily good for another. So I do think, and that may be an unpopular vote or voice, and I'm okay with that. But I think it needed to be said because we're still putting efforts in place with masking and we're still seeing an increase. So just some food for thought.
Yeah, I think my response, sorry. Did you want to respond?
I did, but.
No?
With all due respect, I hear you and I'm on the same page as you. But what's happening outside of school, the fact that kids are wearing masks in school and the numbers are going up doesn't mean it's being spread here in school. It's what's happening at home and everywhere else. And that's where I struggle with it. Because our job is to make sure they're here 5 days a week. That's the ultimate goal, and keep them safe. I'm not a doctor, so I can't debate whether, you know, masking is going to keep them safe or not. I can't go there myself, but I'm stuck with what happens outside of the 6 hours they're here.
And let me just respond back to that. I hear that, and I appreciate that and think of it as both a parent, as an educator, and now someone who sits here. And I, you know, our masks being worn 100% effectively while they're here, both inside and outside of school, we all don't know the answer to that. And that's the caveat to this.
The answer is nothing more than 100%.
I know.
So the answer to that
That's,
is
oh, I know
even
that.
with our best efforts.
That's parenting actually 101. But I agree with that. And so it is a conflictual, I'm conflicted, I guess is what I am expressing here tonight, is the conflict of that, you know, where I morally stand, and then, you know, looking at overall what is in the best interest of kids. I absolutely would love to see them here 100%. But I also am conflicted morally as someone who I do one thing during the day, you know, and then I'm gonna promote something else that's different. So thanks.
You want to say something?
I don't want to lose that thought either, because I have the same thinking. We are trying to control something within our classrooms here, let alone the halls and the buses, but let's just talk about inside our classrooms by forcing our kids to wear masks. When the events are happening totally outside of our control. They go to the malls, they go to the restaurants, they go to the sporting events, and wherever they go, outside the classroom without masks. And we bring them into these buildings, and these buildings are safe havens. They're safe houses because of what Art did with the ionizers that kills these viruses in the air and on the hard surfaces, and all the cleaning that we do, and the you know, we don't have the 6-foot distancing, and that's just another, in my opinion, an arbitrary distance that somebody came up with based on how far you sneeze or wherever it was. But we have all these protective things going on in these buildings, and they're safe. And they kill the viruses when you come in here. But when they leave the buildings and they go out and they do their socializing or whatever they're doing, they're picking it up and possibly getting it there and possibly bringing it back. The kids, we've been told, the kids are not as susceptible as old guys like me. And even if they do come down with it, it's just like a cold. They're not the ones that are dying in the hospitals. It's the adults and the seniors that are. I think we need to hone in on that some more to try to work through how we're going to treat those masks in the classroom. Another item is, another idea is or issue is the required masking on buses, and that's a federal DOT thing, which we probably, and that's a minor, in my opinion, the bus ride wearing masks is a minor inconvenience or problem based compared to being in the school for 6 hours a day with masks. But these kids, these buses are not city buses that run a route through a city on the streets and pick up strangers. These buses are filled with the same kids every day, coming and going. It's the same kids. It's just like sitting in the classroom. It's the same. You're not bringing outsiders in to sit down, so why they have to have masks? But that's another, that's for another day, I think. I'd like to continue to look at how we could unmask in the classrooms to see, to work through this. But let's keep going with your presentation unless somebody else has any other thoughts on this.
The only thing I wanted to add is that I think the question we should be asking is who ultimately should be the ones to make the decision about masking? I mean, because a few years ago, flu that went around schools, stomach bugs, we never once took it upon it as a board to tell a family what they should or shouldn't have a child wear to school. So as a healthcare professional, I struggle because I see it. The hospitals, we are inundated. We're way past where we ever were two years ago. So I think masks are important, but I also think the type of mask you are wearing is important. So the question then also is, these kids are wearing cloth masks. They're not wearing the KN95 that I have on currently. And we actually switched in my department from wearing cloth masks to every single person must be wearing a KN95. So with that, I think that that's also important. And I think that, you know, especially elementary school students, they're not wearing them correctly. So is it truly a mitigation strategy if they're not wearing them correctly? And I also don't think that it should be the burden of a principal or a teacher to have to constantly be trying to get a child to keep it up or put it up. I don't think that that's worth time to keep policing masks. I just don't. So I just think that that's important as well. But believe me, I get it. The transmission is highly transmissible. There's data showing that you literally could be in a hotel room and across the hall another one, and it's going to go right through the air. But with that said, things do pass around, and I don't believe that it's happening within our schools. I think it's happening outside of our schools, and that's where the case counts are going up so high. So.
I think I learned by now. And again, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I really do. And I've been struggling the last 2 weeks with this. But with that said, we can't afford for a more major outbreak that now all of a sudden we don't have teachers, we don't have busing, and we're going to be looking at a scenario similar to a Caddy or some of the other districts that are now having to close or go fully online. I don't know what's worse. If we'd have to tell parents that they're going online for the next week or two, I don't know where we'll be. This is going to get worse before it can get better.
So Joe, that's what I was gonna say. So I think where my mind is going and where I've been the last several months about this, because I feel like every school board meeting for the last year we've been talking about this. I feel like there's a point in time where we have to weigh like the detriments of kids going through another series of online learning bouts, whether it's weeks or months or whatever it is, versus asking students to stay the course, continue to try your best to mitigate, and if that means a mask. Like, I want my kids in school. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen what has happened to, you know, their rigor of learning and studying with my own children. Like, and I'm gonna say this, and this is gonna be the unpopular opinion, like, my kids are not complaining about the masks. Okay, it's a lot of the children's parents that are complaining about masks, you know, and yes, I'm sure there's a percentage of students that are experiencing issues, okay? I'm gonna go out and say that on record, but the majority of students are not complaining, they wanna be in school. So I think it's upon us to like make those decisions to what we know is the best or the recommendations of healthcare professionals and people that are advising us in professional capacities to put measures in place that we think are doing the best by our kids to keep them in school. And that's exactly where I am. I'm weighing the online option and parents, again, struggling with work schedules and managing small children, like, it's that whole thing that I don't want to go back to March of 2020 all over again, like, I just don't. So,
For the record, since we were going on record with our opinions, I don't like these masks at all. I don't find that I don't believe personally that they're very effective. I would love to see the kids taking these masks off in the classrooms in particular. That said, I think you have to look at the current trends. And to make a decision today to say we're going to remove masks tomorrow would absolutely, in my opinion, be the wrong decision to make today, staring at the data we're staring at. A week from now, 3 weeks from now, could be a very different situation. Like I said, where I was in October or November would have been, let's rip these masks off and get on with it. But this Omicron variant is quite significant. It is spiking the numbers of pure, ICU beds and hospitalizations, and even in young kids. So again, because of its sheer volume, it's an issue we've got to deal with. So, we can struggle with this decision all we want, but the reality is we're elected to make decisions here and not just debate them, right? So we actually do have to make decisions one way or another here.
Just a question on slide 13. So at the 2.5% threshold that you're showing for each of the schools that you would consider closing at, we haven't been anywhere close to any of those numbers in the schools on the COVID tracker. Am I looking at that correctly?
Well, first of all, the closure is 5%. The 2.5 we put in a place artificially to avoid the 5. Before the holidays, we had 3 of 4 buildings. 3 of our 4 buildings above 2.5%.
Okay. Because it's showing, so the high school would have to hit 17 kids. Am I correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And it's
Simultaneously within the last 14 days.
Okay, so I'm looking at a 2-week timeline on the COVID tracker as opposed to these 1-week segments that you have broken up. Like on the district's COVID
Yes.
on this, I'm
Yes.
looking at a 2-week timeline here.
Yes,
Okay.
so the metric from the Department of Health is a 14-day rolling window. So as the one day comes on, the 14th day goes off. So it is always this rolling 14-day window
Okay,
that they're looking at. How many active cases of positive staff and students have you had in that building within the last 14 days is what they look at for closure, and is the same recommendation for that metric for the 14 days.
all right, thank you.
No problem. But yes, Dr. Sonoma probably has numbers in front of us to give you the exact percentage, but 3 of our 4 buildings before the holidays were in excess of 2.5%.
They were close to that, okay.
Weisenberg was 3.4, Northwestern Elementary 2.5, middle school was 2.93, high school was 2%.
But 5% is the threshold. 2.5 just gets your attention.
That's why we elected to put the 2.5 measure in, because we wanted to be proactive and not reactive when we got to a point where we had to talk to somebody about a potential closure.
Well, we're really not close to 5% in any of these buildings.
Yeah, and I'll chime in real quick too, since everybody else has an opinion. Yeah, I like to see masks off in the classroom as well. As we look at the data here and these statistics, the one we're talking about right now with the classroom is the one that I think I hold at the highest standard. Because the other ones are relative to what someone had set as the standard. And we talked about this earlier. So when you talk about like in that tier 3 and the county, the weighted, the unweighted, those are still less than 1%. If the unweighted and the weighted for Northwestern is 0.5%. How is that high by any standard? And the testing positivity rate, that's just relative to those that take the test. The denominator is low, I think, because the people taking it have a reason to take it. It's not like you're testing the population to get the full you know, what I mean, to get a real data point. So while I see it in there, and like we talked before, like, it is a spike relative to where we are. But through the whole through the whole time period, I still thought I would always put that into a percentage, and I'm like, man, that percentage is extremely low. And even at this spike, 0.5% to me is a low percentage. So I'd like to see more of our home data be a heavier criteria for what we decide to do.
In the past, we've had school closures for flu. Very rare, but didn't we close one time for flu?
I don't recall closures for flu, even H1N1, which was a highly susceptible virus for children. I don't recall, we did a mass vaccination clinic for H1N1. I don't recall closures. Mrs. Matika might, she's looking skeptical. Oh, we have done for whooping cough, so the Department of Health will close you for pertussis. The Department of Health will close you for some other communicable diseases. Whooping cough, pertussis, it's one that we have had closures for before.
Are those numbers anywhere close to these numbers?
You end up with like 1 or 2 cases of pertussis, they will close you in a building. So they are very small. It is individual counts of students.
So there's
They
not
will,
something we can compare to.
I don't know that it's comparable. And I mean, that's obviously a vaccinated disease, but yeah, it's 1 or 2 and they will close you. I have to look up the actual metric, but it's not a lot and they will close you for that. A couple of years ago, Salisbury School District had to close right before Christmas because they had an outbreak of whooping cough. Keep going. Okay, so I was asked also to provide some status on Lehigh County schools. This is as good as I can get you at the current moment. So for status of Lehigh County schools currently, Parkland, Emmaus, Salisbury, Southern Lehigh, Allentown, and the diocese are all universal masking. The districts in Lehigh County that are optional, I do have some that are beyond Lehigh County if you want to know from what I kind of collected. Hattesauqua, Northern Lehigh, and Whitehall Copley are all optional, and I believe went there directly after the mask mandate was overturned. So some of them have obviously built in mandatory masking in their plan, and some school districts have built in optional into their plan, and some districts have built some sort of tiered matrix into their plan like we have. So it's, I would say, really across the board. And so my other comment to Mrs. Senovitis' comment was, I know these are difficult decisions, but unfortunately the state has laid them with school boards and superintendents to make because you are a public school. And so we have to look out for how to remain open and how to remain open for a free and appropriate public education for all children. And each of the school districts that you see, as well as across the Commonwealth, across the country, has made decisions about where they believe masks should be for their student population. And so unfortunately, that has been the decision that has been laid in our lap. This is a plan that must be submitted to PDE. What you say in face coverings is your decision, but face coverings is a required part of the plan you must respond to. Next slide talks about close contact quarantines. So there are several requirements and some recommendations, and we tried to be really clear about what are requirements and what are recommendations. So schools are required to report cases and exclude positive cases from school. So every Friday, we are required to report. Dr. Sosnova uploads a form with how many cases we have each Friday. If we forget, which he has not done yet, my understanding is I get a nasty email about, sending this in each Friday. So we are required to report cases. We are also required to exclude a positive case from school. Those are requirements.
That means
PDE,
keep the kid away.
yes, exclude him or her or staff from school, yes. If they are positive themselves. Recommendations, Pennsylvania Department of Health and PDE recommend that you exclude or quarantine staff or students who are asymptomatic close contacts. There has also been this exception, which we've talked about a few times. One of the benefits that's not often talked about with masking, when people say it is their choice, you are making a choice for your family, but you're also affecting the people that sit within 6 feet of your child. Because there is an exemption in the close contact CDC that says in an indoor classroom setting, we don't have to exclude a student that was within 3 to 6 feet of an infected student, as long as they both were engaged constantly wearing masks. So that has certainly benefited us during the time where we had masks completely universally after the first 2 weeks of school, to not have to exclude students if they were fully masked. If one or both of the students is not fully masked and they come in contact with a close contact, they will end up in quarantine as recommended. And so this has allowed us to keep many of our students. If we do something different than the masking, universal masking, this won't be an exception that our students will be able to be utilized in the future. So we have a couple slides of recommendations. Mrs. Sheffer asked earlier, like, what are you asking of us? So I would ask for your approval of the recommendations on the last 2 slides. If the board wishes to do something different with the tiered matrix in levels in its existence or completely optional, that second and third bullet is where I need to know them. So we are recommending, and this has been continuous since the beginning, do not come to school if you fail the screening. So we have a screening procedure. If you are sick and you are failing the screening, this is employees, this is students, this is visitors, do not come to school. That is one of the ways we can certainly help keep our environment as sterile as we can if they are sick, students or staff. We are recommending that we continue to follow the tiered face covering decision matrix. I don't know if the numbers are set where you would like them. I think it was put into place to look at the science and the data and to not make emotional decisions, which is what you're all struggling with right now. So look at the data and make a decision, which hasn't been your decision since September 7th, essentially. If you decide to keep the tier, you can always decide to direct us to switch to a different tier and switch us to tier 2 or switch us to tier 1. That is an option, or anything else is an option as well. We are recommending changing extracurricular events to optional masking effective tomorrow. Rationale being in school, everyone's entitled to a public education. That is very different than extracurricular activities that are by choice. If you are participating in extracurricular activities as a coach, as a student, or as a spectator, if you are uncomfortable with the masking requirements, then you can choose not to participate, or you can choose to wear a mask yourself. I would say this is one of our recommendations that we could, if you approve it, could go into place as early as tomorrow. Many of you know this, some of you may not. Although we're a universal masking district, we aren't zero compliance with anything. This included. So if you've been to any of our basketball games, our students don't wear masks during basketball games. They do not wear masks during wrestling matches. If you've been to any of our holiday concerts, our senior nights, any of those, they don't wear masks when they are performing or exerting physical activity. Those are exceptions that have been for some time in the rules. But this would essentially, for the most part, affect students on the bench, affect coaches, and affect spectators. We would ask that you continue, regardless of where you land with the masking requirements, continue to be responsive to case counts and individual outbreaks, so that give us some authority. I mean, you have up to now provided us the authority to make individual switches and not have to wait for a board meeting to do so. If we see data or close contacts that are indicating that there is spread in school that could endanger something other than a closure, that we would pivot individual schools. So what that might mean is if you would make a recommendation in the future for optional or for tier 2, that if we see a building coming close to that 5%, above 2.5, we would pivot that individual building back to universal masking, or the opposite, if they're having good data, pivot them to something less. I mean, data works both ways. So that's our recommendation. We would certainly incorporate any of those recommendations into the plan. And before I open up the information about where you would like to ultimately be in a vote on these recommendations, we were recommending some changes to the isolation and quarantine procedure. Some of you saw these rolled out. Our plan right now indicates that we'll essentially follow any Pennsylvania Department of Health HON, Health Alert Network, that comes out. And so the one that Dr. Sosovic mentioned several times earlier, we did implement that, which implements all of these except for one, which is essentially our decision. We do recommend positive cases must isolate. That is in the most recent recommendations, and we would continue to do that. We would require someone who is a household contact. So if someone in your house has COVID, you are a household contact, that they would be required to quarantine. The new recommendations, and it varies fully vaccinated, not, but 5 days, and then you would be able to come into school wearing a well-fitting mask. The definition of mask is much more specific than some of our gaiters and shield definitions, but you would have to wear a mask for days 6 through 10. That is in the newest update that came out December 30th. This one is our recommendation. It is our recommendation, but to recommend but not require asymptomatic non-household contacts to quarantine. So what that means is if you are a child who's identified as a close contact, if you are asymptomatic, not developing symptoms, we would recommend but not require a quarantine. They will also need to wear a mask for 10 days if they choose to accept that option and return to school. And then lastly, any identified close contacts that develop symptoms will have to go through and isolate as per PAVOH. But essentially the bullet that is the third one is our recommendation and has been certainly supported by the Department of Health that is a recommendation, not a requirement. And so those are slide 18 and 19 are the two slides of our recommendations that we would like to roll out to parents as potential changes and incorporate into the plan. So when that 6-month approval that Mr. Delker mentioned earlier came out, also was the provision to, when we roll out any information, roll it out to our families and then put it on the website, incorporate it into the plan, which we are prepared to do with whatever you would like to do tonight.
Clarifying question on the removal of, so just so I understand, you said, use your basketball game example, athletes on the floor playing the game are not wearing masks. Today, athletes on the bench are or are not, or we don't.
That's school dependent, which has
Okay.
become part of a problem. Because some schools, as they went optional, as did their teams.
Okay.
So that is,
We, if it's in our facility here, do or do not require the kids on the bench to be wearing
I
masks?
believe the answer is yes, our coaches are also wearing masks.
Sorry, going to the basketball game. None players.
Our kids,
No, they are. They don't.
I would have to check with Jason.
Okay, so let's assume today our requirement is if they wear the masks on the bench, whether or not they are or aren't, that's a policing issue. Under this new approach, so under what you said before about if a kid on the bench is exposed to a positive person, let's say that, you know, one of the players or one of the other kids on the bench is tested positive, essentially, because they're wearing a mask, we're saying you don't need to quarantine or remove yourself from play for future days.
No, hold on, the mask requirement is only in a classroom. That exception, is that what you're referencing, the exception? The exception is only in a classroom. So
Only a
two
classroom.
adults sitting next to one another, it does, if you go back to,
Okay.
can you go back to slide 17?
I guess what I was getting at is if we say masks are completely optional in extracurriculars,
Mhm.
are we then saying that if there's a positive case, we're gonna put more kids on the sideline? Or they're gonna?
I would say that's potential, but masks right now, my words, don't get you out of jail now. So what has helped us, and I don't know if Jason's on, but what has helped us with athletics is as follows. Your biggest source of problems where kids spend that distance and duration in contact with one another is the bench, the locker room, and the bus. If you've ever, and Jason's watched many, as has other athletic directors across the board, watched a video, besides even wrestling matches, even when they're paired, you know, naturally cohorted, they don't spend that distance and duration because it is cumulative, it is consecutive, not cumulative number of minutes. Your danger times where kids spend that amount of time next to one another and have the potential to expose people next to them as bench, locker room, and bus. So those are really your areas that you have that, but the mask right now even doesn't prevent that. That exception that's on your screen currently does not apply to teachers, it does not apply to staff, it does not apply to other adults. It's very specific to say a K-12 indoor classroom setting only within 3 to 6 feet.
Jason is on.
Jason is on, he's welcome to pipe in.
Mr. Zimmerman, if you want on mic.
Sure, thank you. Just to answer a direct question, yes, our students are required, student athletes are supposed to and are required to mask when they are not actively engaged in the sport. So we're following the mandate as written, and whether it happens or not, again, you have compliance 100%. I don't know. We do our best. I can tell you last night they were fully compliant at the boys basketball game. We were down at Salisbury. Fortunately, we have the same rules and regs, so it was very easy for us to comply. In talking with some other schools who have played non-compliant teams, it's been a little bit of a struggle. I have not realized that. We just played Northern Lehigh before. the holiday, or actually during the holiday, between Christmas and New Year's, and they are a mask optional. They complied with our policy and were great, including their spectators. So that is what is supposed to be happening, if that answers your question.
So when we play a school here in our facility who has a optional masking, the kids and the parents or the spectators follow the rules of the home school and not of their own school and not the school they're playing in?
No,
So the agreement amongst athletic directors is we try to honor each other's policy or plan. That's what we try to do. If push came to shove, they'd probably honor their own. We're not the mask police, as Chief will tell you. The kids and the coaches, a majority of them have been doing a great job from opposing schools. And I believe our student athletes and our coaches have been doing a fantastic job. So yes, when Northern Lehigh came to us on December 30th, Northern Lehigh utilized our policy, and that is communicated before each game to the opposing school.
So on our doors, athletic doors, there's signs that say masks are continuing to be required in this stadium. He's saying with most athletic directors, they have an unspoken rule that they will respect the rule of the facility where they're going. Use Northern Lehigh as an example, for those of you who couldn't hear him, that Northern Lehigh in December they have had was when the order is released, they will go back to mask optional over the holiday, and I was present for that game. Did play Northern Lehigh, and their coach and their spectators were respectful of our procedures, even though they were mask optional. It's not always going to be so civil, and Jason said, and we had an issue day one when we had some people walk in and say, we just got the message from our district, it's optional. And so, he said, we're not going to be the mask police. It's not worth getting into a scuffle with somebody, but certainly somebody will try to hand them a mask and say, could you please be respectful of our procedures? But the mask, Todd, is an exception for the classroom. So if they are masked next to each other on a bench, the mask doesn't get the other kid out of jail.
Got it. But so just to complete that swing now back to the classroom, if we were to go to more of a mask optional mode under these current quarantine guidelines, we would potentially have a situation where if more kids are maskless, we will end up quarantining more kids.
I believe that is an accurate statement, but I don't know that. It's not gonna be a whole classroom. So we've heard lots of comments like the whole classroom's getting quarantined. Whole classroom's not gonna get quarantined. It's gonna be anybody who's within 6 feet for 15 minutes of the kid who's positive, which has consistently been the rule. Distance and duration has consistently been the rule.
Yeah, and that's why we put on there the recommendation to not quarantine asymptomatic individuals, because if we go with anything other than what we are now, we lose that classroom exception. And so based on the evidence we've seen, we feel comfortable with not moving forward with the asymptomatic quarantines. And so if you look to do anything with what you're doing now, if we remove that exception, we really need to look at and hope that you adopt the asymptomatic, not also be quarantined, because we won't be able to keep up with it.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do anything other than universal, you must adopt the asymptomatic not being quarantined, because you will have a number of kids quarantined. You'll have to make sure that you're not quarantining, you are not requiring. We will still recommend, we'll still call you and say you were exposed, but we won't require the quarantine.
Second question on the, I think it was your next page, maybe, it was related to children that are exposed at home to a
Household contact.
household contact. How are we possibly going to identify household contact other than it's on honor system that they tell us?
Well, that's what we're doing now, essentially. I mean, they're 90% of this is the honor system, let's be real. Like, you could get a PCR test, and until it comes through the Department of Health, they could be in school a long time. Household contact right now is the honor system. So right now, whether it's a staff person or a student, unless the family is quarantined from the Department of Health and they send that through to us, it's the honor system right now for that very same. We're doing that now. We're identifying household contacts and close contacts in school. And then there's a whole other category of people in the middle that are contact somewhere other than here. So that could be the Girl Scouts, that could be the ski trip. I'm not saying Girl Scouts have a problem, but, or birthday parties or sleepovers or any one of those in between, not school, but not household contacts. But that's, I mean, Mrs. Matika and Dr. Sosnovic, as well as our fabulous nurses, are the ones doing that now. You are welcome to both contact, but, or comment. They're doing household contacts now.
Yeah, and really the kudos has to go to our community. I mean, they have been very forthcoming. There was a question before about our staff vaccination survey, whether people were forthcoming. And, you know, they've been very good. They recognize that they have an illness that's easily spread among other individuals potentially, and they've been very forthcoming in identifying who it is. We need to figure out what that positive cases isolation period is, so we can determine the quarantine period of the household contact, and everybody's been very fantastic from a community perspective, parents and students, in providing that information to us.
And I'm finding the same also with, again, with the employees, sharing the information, if their husband is positive, what was the onset of symptoms, how long have they been sick, and then we start the isolation and the quarantine period. That's been going on almost for 2 years now. So they are very forthright with that information. It is the honor system, and we believe we're getting that accurate information. We are seeing the increase right now because people were more active over the holidays. Hence, they are saying, I believe I was exposed at Christmas. I believe I was exposed at New Year's. I know my brother-in-law now tested positive. So we get that information freely from the employees.
Mr. Zimmerman just asked me to relay too, because he is having a little bit of mic issues, that if we did elect to move to an optional or no mask environment, he has other mitigation strategies that he's already thought through to introduce to teams to help with the potential of them meeting that time duration or distance issue, spreading kids out, making sure that they're moving it less than 15 minutes, stuff like that.
How much of this kind of thing that you're talking about with the kids understanding distancing is being discussed with the kids by the coaches? Are we educating the kids in their hand washing? I know we've been through the hand washing, but I mean, it's distancing, especially in the athletic arena.
I've personally witnessed every season since this has started, Mr. Zimmerman getting on a soapbox and really laying down the law in terms of what the impact will mean if our student athletes don't follow these procedures. And a lot of times it means when you look at small numbers, like on a basketball team, you're canceling that game and possibly not making it up.
Yeah.
So they understand the impact of not following this. And I will say our student athletes have been champions in many regards to make sure that all of our student populations are following these processes, so we don't close a building down, because that means extracurriculars will also be shut down if we reach some of these thresholds.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, and it goes back to what Rachel said earlier. Our kids want to be in school and they want to play. And so even during the first 2 weeks of school, and I can't say how many or who, but our kids were saying, you gotta wear a mask because we need to play. We need to be on the court. We need to not get shut down. And a testament, I agree with what Dr. Snow said. We haven't had teams shut down regularly. Some other schools have. I think our kids are, and our coaches certainly are, as well as, Mr. Zimmerman certainly enforcing that to follow the rules. And our teachers are doing the same thing in classrooms, which is evident why we haven't had shutdowns, to try to do their best to keep things as sanitary as possible.
Well, let's taking action on things that we have control. And I think, there's gonna be personal responsibility with everybody in the community and the school to try to protect each other from this thing we're in. I'd like to look back at slide 15 at those tiers and just open up discussion about the top two bullets. Those things, that's a metric, that's some indication of where the community is going outside of our control. The bottom three metrics are things that I think we have more control over. or that we can react to and change. And maybe we could take a look at these metrics and separate the top two from the bottom three and make the bottom three more of the indicators that or thresholds that we need to look at to move from one to the other. And I think that based on what you said about the kids wanting to understanding why we were wearing masks and why they and wanting to stay in school, and there's a reason why we're doing this to help them do that, stay on the team, etc. Instead of mandating, can we recommend to the kids? Let the kids do it if they want to do it. Wear a mask. And if there's kids that don't want to wear a mask, and I'm being told, I'm hearing that the kids are not the problem. And we've seen this for the last couple of years. The kids are very cooperative. They do what they're told. They understand why they're doing it. And they'll comply. This issue about mandating is, I think, what's at the core of the objections from the community to what we're doing in here as far as the masking is concerned. They don't want to be told by the authority that you have to do something. You have to wear a mask. Like you don't want to be told you have to get a shot. And looking at the slide that we had that shows how many kids had this shot, I think that's number 10. Those are not big numbers. Those are small numbers. You know, kindergarten 17%, and it kind of creeps up as as you go to 12th grade, and 12th grade is only 50%. So people are not taking advantage of those vaccines. They don't want to be. It's not mandated, and they don't want to be told they have to do it. So if they feel they're going to benefit from it, they'll go get a shot. And I think that that can be extrapolated to the masking in a certain extent. The kids want to wear a mask, they want to stay in school, they're going to want to wear a mask. But if we take this mandate away and make it recommended, it might be more acceptable. I don't know. It's just thinking, which is what we're here to do. Any other ideas of where we ought to proceed?
I actually had a question. I'm actually concerned a little bit now about something that Rachel said. How many staff members would we have to potentially go out on quarantine, whether it's bus drivers or teachers, where that would cause the school to be closed? Because my thought process is that this is going so fast. It's spreading very, very fast. So probably within 2 weeks, we would have a lot more data and a lot more accurate numbers. But if we have too many staff members come out sick and that they can't come to school, that's going to obviously be a safety, and we can't have children in school without a teacher. We can't have buses run without bus drivers. So do we have an approximate kind of number? Because we're talking about cases and what it reaches, but that's really only just cases. It doesn't take into account that we need people to be at work.
Okay. So I talked with some of you before about, I called it, we need to be cautious about our numbers and outbreaks, but we also need to remain in an operational status. That's also our job as an employer. And so, in transportation, you all got the message at the beginning of the year that we have been tight since the beginning of the year. And so on any given day, it could be one driver that we don't have and we can't transport. It is, from what I could gather, the primary reason why Catasauqua went and moved online is because of staffing. I heard East Penn's message, who equally closed before the holiday for bus driver situation. I don't know if it's COVID related or just shortage, but the shortage of employees across the district that we have talked about in this boardroom and given some incentive and retention bonuses to try to recruit and retain those that we have in some of our departments are not a lot of people. And the other part of that is to what degree. So transportation could be as little as one person on any given day is out, and we don't have enough drivers to transport, because literally that is how close we are to not transporting. Art and his mechanics and his grounds people are on probably every single day driving. Art probably the last of which, but is on a lot. Mrs. Matika can give probably more refined numbers, but there have been days right before the holiday, we were 15 subs short. What that means is there are 15 classrooms without teachers. So yes, we're open, and yes, your kids are here, but they might or might not be being taught. They might be in a coverage situation where some adult is staying with them and is covering them, and our principals and teachers are doing that a lot because of the lack of sub situation. And so before the holidays, there was one day that we pulled people out of this office and sent them to buildings to monitor kids and monitor lunch duties and monitor recess and put them in auditoriums with supervision.
Our fill rate for substitutes has been 60 to 70%. There were many days years ago where we were filled 99, 100% on a regular basis. So we're very close to being inoperable some days in the way of staffing. Also, remember, not just our staff gets sick, but their children get sick. And then they, sorry. Yo, not only our student, I'm into it. Not only our staff is sick, but they have students, their own children that are sick, and they're missing time because of that. And some of those children are very sick. That's on top of the hip replacements, the knee replacements, and some of the other things that are normal everyday activities where the staff gets sick and need to take off from work.
I mean, the answer is it's dependent on departments and how many people it is, but I won't put our kids or our staff in an unsafe situation. So if there is a safety situation where I don't believe we can adequately, I mean, we and the board who was here last Christmas, I mean, there were times before Christmas last year that we were on the verge of closure, and I had one staff member watching 2 rooms full of kids because we were so short to just try to stay open. You know, I think you will see some of those things where schools either have to close and shift personnel to other buildings. Whether masks make that better or not, I don't, but yes, the quarantine piece of it is an operational and how long can you continue to operate. Transportation, and Mr. Oaks can certainly comment, is by far our closest, and that is a combination of an already existing labor shortage, the length of time to get a CDL, and that you just can't put anyone on a bus and say, here you go. It's not a coverage of a classroom. You are driving a 3-ton vehicle, and you need proper licensure to do so. It's not, I can't just put anybody on there. Like I can have a classroom coverage, for example. Want to add that?
We call fire.
No, I
companies.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm fortunate because I was able to solicit some building and ground personnel to come over to transportation. So I'm not driving as frequently, but I'm a parachute. So fortunately, we don't have to get into that situation, and we've had some opportunities with some students that are home, that are college students, that actually come back and drive for us because they're remote. And so they're actually driving vans, and so we're splitting up buses into vans because they're able to help us. So we're using every tactic in the book to just maintain, but it's very, very thin.
So then is it possible for us to, being that the new variant really just recently, within the past 2 weeks, really started to emerge, is it possible that we can look at the data in 2 weeks to see what happens with that?
Yeah, all of that is a board decision. We will do whatever you need us to do and bring it back to you in whatever capacity and time frame you wish. So yes.
You look at it weekly, don't you?
Yeah, we send it to you. I mean, the newer board members have not received as many, 52 weeks worth, but yes, we send it to you every Friday. Dr. Simic does all of the charts and sends it to you each Friday. So you will see it as board members each Friday to see whether it's trending, and we give you the numbers and the charts as you've seen them here. So you will know that, but if you would like to formally discuss it publicly in 2 weeks, we can bring those more publicly or do whatever you need us to do.
I just think within 2 weeks, you'll see how many employees you have or don't have, or how many kids were in and out. And I would just hate to have us vote. And I've made my personal opinion very clear of where I stand with masking and my opinions of how the kids are wearing them and all of that. But my number one goal all along is that the kids should be in school 5 days a week. From a parent perspective of there's not people to stay home with them. I don't think our teachers do a fantastic job, but nothing beats being in person with our teachers. So my thought is that if our healthcare systems are kind of looking at things, and I'm pretty sure that they think it's going to peak within the next couple weeks, maybe that is when we should officially kind of make a decision. And that's just my opinion.
I think when we're under a mandatory order like we just came from, but that didn't have a deadline, didn't have a sunset to it. I think our plan talks about 2 weeks, 2-week windows. We always review, we always set something in place for a 2-week period of time, and then either keep it going or change it after that 2-week review, correct?
That's correct. So our, go ahead.
No, I just said that's accurate.
So the top of our, that's on our tier case covering metrics that we will, movement among the tiers will be considered after 2 consecutive weeks from the indicated change of criteria. However, immediate changes may be necessary as a result of an outbreak in a building. So that's the obviously shift. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think we will be, I'm hoping if the data trends anywhere close to where it trended last year, you did see mid to end January, a very distinct trend in a different direction. And let me be clear, I don't like masks either. No one likes them. I think one of the court cases said something like the only people who like masks are bank robbers. And I think we could all agree with that. No one likes it. We would all like to be, and that's why we took a stand to start where we are. I'm not sure now is the time to make the change. That's my personal opinion, but the board, it is the board's decision if you wish to.
I wanted, I think I agree with what everybody has said. I do think though, if we talk specifically back to Bill's earlier point on 15, and maybe the answer is this has to be done in 2 weeks, or could be done in 2 weeks, but under the guiding metrics, I do think we should adjust the number of cases per 100,000 level, right? That allows us to move towards, at least masks, classroom wearing of masks reduced from mandatory to optional. And I agree with Todd Hernandez as it relates to the positivity rate, because I think that's a misleading metric because of the way the testing is going. So I would like us to consider looking at maybe the trajectory more of these metrics as opposed to the true net number, right? In other words, if 2 weeks from now, instead of Lehigh County being at 765, we're down to 400, I would feel much more confident moving to tier 2 than looking at the way the charts are trending right now. So I think we have the factor trend, and I think the net number could be adjusted that allows us to at least remove some or make optional masks in the classroom, get us to that level sooner rather than later. But again, right now, today, I don't think it's the right time to say we're going to move to that level.
And clarification on your targeted. So is your targeted where the mask optional in the classroom, but when they're switching in the hallways and where else is there?
Nurses, trainers, bus, and when they switch in the hallways, but when they
Optional, mandatory.
mandatory.
In tier 2.
In tier 2, and then when they go to the same tier we started in the beginning of the school year, when they go to their classroom and sit down at their desk or at their office, I kind of called it the restaurant rule, like, when you go into the restaurant, you were wearing your mask, but when you sat down, you took it off, whether you were office or desk. It's the happy middle ground. It's not great on either side, but I think it's an agreeable, I thought at the beginning of the school year, it made sense as an agreeable place that we could start and we could see what our trend data in school was telling us with that data. We just didn't get that opportunity because of the order going into effect September 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at slide 15 and again, look at those first 2 bullets at the top and use that as guidance or just trending for analysis, but not for taking action. Use the bottom 3 bullets to take action and the top 3 just for advisement or looking at trends.
So what you're saying, so Bill, what you're saying is if the bottom 3 are in tier 1 or tier 2, and the top 2, for example, are
Still above.
trending down, then we would potentially move to tier 2.
Yeah. Something like that. You can look at it, see, put your spin on it, and make it the way you'd like to see it. But that's just a recommendation. Should have board consensus if we want to ask him to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I need some direction if that's the will of the board for 1, and 2, whether or not you wish us to bring you back a recommendation, because I will just say, we're kind of shooting in the dark, because these numbers came from a medical person, and, you know, to go to Mrs. Senovitis' comment earlier, I don't believe the networks are going to give us an opinion other than what is supported by CDC. They have not done that before, so we will bring you back a metric, but we will be crafting it ourselves, for lack of a better word, because I don't believe we'll get.
We crafted this on our own.
The top two metrics are the CDC. If you're asking us to adjust the metrics themselves as the numbers, we will have to craft what the new numbers will look like, because I don't know that there's any guidance out there that's different than that. Yeah, we crafted I'll say the composite of the metrics, the 5 different things, but the numbers are crafted from the CDC, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Todd, how would you like to see the trend as a positive, negative % change over the 2-week time?
I think so, yeah. I can't tell you what the exact number should be
Yeah.
at this point without sort of looking at the data, but.
Sure, I just want to make sure
I
that's
feel
where
like
you
it's
were
a
going with
percentage
that.
change off of that. Point.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
But that's still flawed, because you could have those lower metrics remain the same. And you could have the trajectory of those upper ones go in either direction. But now, do we tie ourselves into something that's outside versus what we have inside? And I just like to add one more comment, is that if we went to an optional plan, that doesn't mean everybody's taking their mask off. We're probably gonna still have more than half the people in total wear their masks. That's just a guess. I could be totally off on that. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure it's not gonna be 100% maskless in those options, so.
I hate to say this, but I have some friends at some of the other school districts that are doing mask optional. And I'm hearing it's 75% aren't wearing masks. And I have a friend who's down in Central Bucks, and I have a friend who's at Council Rock, and they said the same thing.
75% are not
Not
wearing
wearing
masks.
masks.
I mean, I was gonna say this earlier, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but I almost feel like the children are following the mask rule because we have it set in place as a school. As soon as we release that mask requirement, okay, they're going to take their masks off. Like, I feel like we're gonna set them up now for children, a situation where there's gonna be a discriminatory feeling about who's wearing and who's not, if we say it's optional. Like, I have a hard time believing that my 8th grader, if I say to her, go to school and I want you to wear a mask, and she's gonna get in her school classroom, all her friends are unmasked, that she's gonna continue to wear her mask. I completely doubt it. So I feel like now in the position that we're in, by saying like masks are required in the classroom because that's the position of the school district, they're all following it. I kind of feel like either you're in or you're out. Like I don't know. That's just how I feel about it.
The whole reason I just said what I said was because you made a good point, Todd, because we are where we are with these high numbers in tier 3, and then we have others that we're in tier 1. I bet you we could go the opposite direction though and have simultaneous outbreaks once we go to mask optional, and numbers are trending down, but yet numbers in the classroom are going up. I just.
Right, and that would dictate us to then move in
Are
that
we
other
gonna
direction.
change? I mean, if we're
Right.
gonna change, we're gonna have to change some of the metrics there too.
Yeah, I just don't think those first 2 bullets. I want to get to tier 2 for.
I do agree as a guidance, because if you see the trend shooting straight up and you see numbers in the community shooting straight up, you can't just throw that away and say, yeah, we're not gonna look at that.
I completely agree, Joe. I mean, that is to me the early indicator. And if you look back on slide 9, the trends are going up in our case count as well, right? So to me, those are the indicators that you need to keep an eye on. I agree with Bill. I don't think they should be they shouldn't be a deciding factor, but I think you have to look at the trend of those indicators in the community to help guide that decision. I would absolutely support, reducing our reliance on those indicators. And I do agree that the positive rate is flawed. It's a bad way to look at it. It's a way to look at it. I like the bottom three as better guiding factors, but I do think the other two give you that gauge. I think back to Bill's earlier points, I think we've done some things in the classrooms with our, mitigation and the investments we've made in the filtration systems that, create a very clean environment for these students while they're seated, in the classroom. Again, I think while they're moving and while they're close and while they're, on the buses, et cetera, we've got to continue to support the masks, but certainly for the youngest of the kids, there's a lot of reasons to, to try to move us towards this tier 2 educational experience.
So this is an unofficial analysis that I think Dr. Stanek would agree with. I would say our data trends in the building cases about 2 weeks behind the spikes in the county we've seen. That is pretty consistent across the entire pandemic. And the reason why, when you said I would, I would have had a different feeling when those numbers were lower, as did I, if you all recall, thought we could go to the optional standpoint. And then I actually had a message crafted that said something like, and our numbers have not trended in the same way that the county numbers have trended. And slap 2 weeks later, they absolutely did exactly what I should have expected them to do. Trended exactly in the same way the county numbers did, just slightly delayed. That's the problem in some of the delay and the trend data in the buildings as well. It is in some way indicative of what we're seeing in the classrooms. I don't know if you would agree with the 2 week stance, but.
Yeah, there's been about, I would say about 2 week delay. Like we'll see Lehigh County start spiking up and then we're still in a decent position. And then 2 weeks later, we start to play catch up. It's been pretty consistent.
Well, I think it's worth following those top 2 bullets and monitoring and using them as a guide, but take them out as a requirement to meet that threshold. Could you bring that back as some kind of a recommendation to the tiers to remove those top 2 as a requirement? I mean, is there consensus for something like this?
Well, I think, I get what you're saying, but the fact that there's metrics that go across all 3 tiers gives us the flexibility to make a decision, right? When you remove it, then it's more hardwired, if you will, right?
There's less variability.
Correct. So I'm not saying by any means that we don't keep tracking that data and looking at it. Because I agree with everybody. I think it's an important piece that we continue to look at. I just I don't feel that it deserves the same amount of weight as some of the other metrics, that's all. But I think if it stays there, if all the metrics are in tier 3, I don't think anybody's having there's no discussion here. I think everybody would probably be more in line. And conversely, if everything's all on the far left, we're the same way. The fact that it's all in the middle, now you're coming to us for the answer, right? Basically. So we have, I don't know, am I not thinking about this right? The fact that we have metrics in all 3 tiers.
It forces.
It forces us to make a decision, and we can make that decision. When you remove some of those metrics, then it's hard for us to say, oh, well, we should kind of go this other direction because we have this other data here that we still want to at least look at and consider. Just food for thought.
Maybe we can verbally describe that in the plan. Not do it in the chart, just verbally explain how we're going to evaluate those 5 bullets and use it and make it and give us the opportunity to make a decision based on the bottom 3 and watching the trends of the top 2.
Yeah, ultimate,
You're the ones that are gonna have to.
I was just saying,
monitor
that's what my
that.
problem is,
Jen still has
ultimately,
to make this call.
that you're,
And
yes.
now we're saying, how do we give Jen?
Yeah, right, that's what I was gonna say,
Are we taking
ultimately,
that decision
you're
away from
giving
Jen,
lots
or-
of advice, but the bottom line is, a message needs to go out that said, we are in tier blank.
Right.
With my name on it.
Yeah.
That's the end result of all of
Yeah.
this. And so some people, based on the description across tiers and how you are personally or subjectively weighting them in your brain, says whether you agree with what tier I place us in or not. That was why I was trying to get some more definitive. Do you want to continue to follow the preponderance of evidence? Do you want to more heavily weight some over others? Do you want to scrap the whole thing and make a decision? What, because the ultimate job, it can't wait till a board meeting. So it's going to be my name on a letter that says we are in tier 3, like I sent, or we will move to tier 2. And equally, regardless of what that says, we need the flexibility to be able to pivot one way or another, depending on what data in the building is saying, with the ultimate goal we all agree to, staying open 5 days a week with as little disruption as possible. Because although, you know, hours and hours have been spent on masks, the majority of our community wants that more than they want anything else. And we believe that is best. I mean, Lauren said it best earlier. Our kids need to be in front of our very caring educators 5 days a week, all the time. And whatever we need to do to make that happen is the tough decision we have to make.
So you could draw a line between bullet 2 and 3 through tier 1 through tier 2, and when you hit the differentiated line from tier 2 to tier 3, go straight up, and let those two in tier 3 initiate a board decision more so than just throwing it on you. Meaning, if, say we change the guideline metric to 250 cases per 100,000. And if we're over that, even though these 3 down here are over in tier 1, tier 2, but because it's going to generate a board decision that now you got to come to us or
If they're so high. you
if
mean
they're
off
so
the chart
high beyond any metric that we set for that. Now it becomes a collective decision, not just yours.
Well, those are, no offense, those are the easier ones. When they're off the chart high, those are the more easy ones. It's when it looks like it does now where there's a decision. If there's numbers that are off the chart high, that's almost an easier decision for all the reasons you have very artfully articulated earlier.
But that's what I'm saying is you can't get rid of number 1 and number 2 because now it generates a more thorough discussion, and it doesn't throw it all on you. It throws on us too.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's my job to make the decision. I'm not worried about. I want to make sure that we are doing what the board wants us to do and the direction of the board, which was the tiered matrix. And if you continue to support that or you do not, I will, and I mean, to be honest, and you all, the board members that were here before this, you know that I made all the decisions and tried to alleviate some of that from the board. We actually made those decisions before board meetings based on the data well in advance of board meetings as data shifted all the way up until they made us bring it back for a 6-month requirement. So we've always shifted and made those requirements, rolled them out to the community, rolled out the message, and you gave us guidelines to operate by, which is your job. So like think about policy, procedure, how things are orchestrated in a district. You give us guiding metrics, you tell us the direction you want to go, you tell us what rules you want us to operate within, and we administer the programs. It's the same thing here. We just need to make sure with 3 new members and some decision-making, because we're across the tiers, that you continue to support this, or you want things more heavily weighted in certain areas, or you want certain things being called advisement versus decision-making, like I've heard all those things thrown out, because we can adjust this and bring it back to you for approval and incorporation of the plan with whatever you wanted to say. But we want to do what you all believe we should be doing as the decision makers, with us guiding, giving us to some direction.
Well,
I'm not afraid to make decisions.
With that said, then we give you direction to go with bullet points 3 through 5 as what we want to see heavily weighted, and then bringing back us the other information for information only, I guess.
What's
It's,
the
we still,
rule?
we still would have to approve that. We won't get to approve that until 2 weeks from now.
Yes, that's accurate.
So
If you want us to recraft this, that the first two are, I heard advisement, decision, guidance versus the last three being, I'm gonna call them the decision-making metrics. We would bring that back because this matrix as it exists right now is built into your plan under face coverings, that we will institute this as written, 5 guiding metrics to consider in making a decision.
numbers don't change in 2 weeks here. Everything kind of stays the same. We approve that plan. Then what happens?
Well, if they're exactly the same, you probably drop to tier 2 if you're not considering those top 2.
Okay.
Because you have right now 2 in tier 2, 1 in tier 3, and 2 in tier 1. If you go with, I'm gonna call it bullet 3, 4, and 5 solely.
I think fundamentally, I can't understand why we would change from the plan right now when just overall across the nation, the cases are highest they've ever been, and we're considering changing the plan. I think I'm just struggling with, like, can we not wait another month, or can we not wait 2 more months and again, track the data, but not disseminate what data we're tracking. We just continue to track the data and make the decisions based on the recommendations that we've been following for the last almost 3 years now. But that's just me, Bill. Like, you know, I mean, I'm one of 9. And
Another, and this may be simplifying it too much, but take a look at these other schools that are optional, Catasauqua, Northern Lehigh, Wyandotte, how are they faring? You know, where are their classroom cases falling? You know, are they getting worse or are they staying the same?
Well, I pulled all 3. They all have data trackers on their website. What they don't have that I would actually have to get from the superintendent or someone at each of those districts is the historical. So I can't answer the question, have they been getting worse or better? All 3 districts have data trackers on their website. I actually sent them to Mrs. Height yesterday, I believe, when she asked for it. So Northern Lehigh has a data tracker on their website. 13 cases, 12 cases, 5 cases, 13 cases across a couple weeks. Catasauqua, I think, closed the high school due to staffing, not necessarily COVID per se. They are running 2.4%, 3.5%, 2.9%, 2.94% across their buildings in confirmed cases. Whitehall has a data tracker up that has numbers by building, not historical. The last 14 days has 43 cases in the district, 33 at the high school, 0 at middle, 6 at Zephyr, 3 at Steppo, 1 at Beckley. I don't know because they don't do the historical, whether that is up, down. This might make them, but I do not know if it's up, down, or consistent because they don't have the history.
So I'm not gonna speak without looking at Whitehall's data. That's a different role that I fill. What I will tell you upon observation, 95% at the middle school staff and students are in a mess by choice. I agree to the peer pressure. You know, you're asking kids to make tough decisions. In my role in that capacity, what I see is kids are very supportive of one another's decision. With that said, you know, that district has different set of needs, kids and families and pressures than we do here. And so, you know, that decision to go mask optional is, I don't know the rationale for that. That was directed by their board. So what I will tell you is that, you know, kids and families and staff will make decisions that they feel are in their best interest, not only in their classrooms with their students. If they're able to 6 feet distance, 15 minutes, they are aware of their surroundings. And so they, including staff, and I will be frank, I am the minority. I am not wearing a mask. in my place of employment. And I've been given every opportunity, get vaccinated, do this and do that, but that's my personal choice. And we honor that. And so I don't want to speak for the elementary. I don't want to speak for other buildings. I don't have that data. I wasn't prepared to speak on that.
Sorry about that.
But I will tell you, it's the choice, and people are knowledgeable and educated enough to be able to make that decision based on their personal, whether it's employment, family situation, and very mindful. Like I have to say, the staff is very mindful of student situations, regardless of where they feel or how they feel about it, will make decisions based on where their kids are. You know, I'm a little bit, you know, pro education right now because we all want to be in person. I don't know what anyone in any district talks to you. That is absolutely the goal. So when I shared my struggles earlier, it's because on a personal level, I am afforded the opportunity to make a choice of what my employment looks like. But I'm also very conscientious of those situations around us with kids and families and staff. And I think that's happening and why I think it's been relatively successful.
What do you want us to do?
Okay, let's,
Do you want to take all the action items, or all the recommendations on those slides and then give us some direction on what to bring back for the tiered face covering?
yeah,
That's
let's,
probably the easiest. Take everything except for that. If you agree with all those other recommendations, we will incorporate them into the plans.
that would be slide 18 and 19.
Yes, except for bullet 2 and 3, and then give us some separate direction on what you want us to bring back to
Bullet
January.
two, sub-bullet.
Excuse me?
Bullet
Bullet
two
two and
a
sub-bullet two,
sub-bullet of
correct.
two, not three.
And then we'll get back to what you want us to bring you back to the next.
So
board
the
meeting.
process will be, we'll give you direction tonight. You go back and redo this plan based on the recommendations. Bring it back to us in 2 weeks, and then we'll look at it, discuss it, and vote to accept it, or
Well, there's some recommendations on here we're making recommended starting tomorrow. So
then we have to vote on that.
yes. So if you wish to make those tonight, the athletics, the changes in the asymptomatic quarantine, if you wish to make those changes effective January 6th, you need to take action on them tonight. We will incorporate them in the plan and the communication and roll them out. If you want to hold on them and do them all on January 19th, you're also welcome to do that.
No, let's, if you're ready and the board is willing to
Okay.
approve slide 18 and 19, we'll take action on that now.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to what we were discussing.
Yep, and give us some direction what you want to see on the 19th.
So I would entertain a motion to move forward with the recommendation and approve slide 18 and 19 to be included in the health and safety plan.
Minus that bullet point, right?
But yeah, minus that.
The one about the tiered face covering, which we'll get to in a moment.
I would actually like to propose that we wait on the change the extracurricular events. I think optically, if we decide to stay masking, I don't think that that looks right.
Okay.
And that's my opinion on that.
So do you wish to consider all of them on January 19th based on what Dr. Hudson said? Or do you wish?
Change
Yeah, you do. Sorry, you do have a motion. Do you
No, we don't have a
second? No, you
motion.
don't have a motion.
Are you suggesting a change to one particular bullet or?
Yeah,
which?
she's talking about the extracurricular
Yeah.
bullet, making the change January
Third
6th.
one down.
I was just saying that
On
optically, I think
18.
if we're like, you have to wear a mask in school, and then we're like, oh, but you can come to our gym at 7 PM and watch a basketball game, and you don't have to wear a mask, and your kids don't have to wear a mask. I just think optically, that doesn't look right. So I think, again, it's kind of like an all or nothing thing. If we're gonna talk about it in 2 weeks and decide, are we gonna go mask optional, then I think that bullet makes sense to go with that. And then it's together. I mean, that's my opinion. And I understand what you were saying about how, you don't have to participate in extracurriculars. I agree and I disagree, because extracurriculars are part of a student's well-being, and it's what they, it's an outlet. And again, I just think if we're gonna make them wear them in school, then what's the difference there? It's kind of going back to what I was saying about how I don't think it's spreading within a school. Personally, I want to get back to optional, but I think the cases are going to go up, and I think that should be what we're thinking about now.
Okay, well, my response would be, if the board does agree with that, then I would just hold everything, because the importance of the asymptomatic change is really coupled with any mass change. I mean, not that it's not, I mean, you will quarantine more kids, but I would just make, if the board agrees with what Dr. Hunsicker mentioned and supports that and does not want to change the extracurricular events to optional effective January 6th, then I would just hold all, there's essentially 3 changes: the tiers, if you make a change, the extracurricular, and the asymptomatic. Those are your 3 action items that I'll say are different than what you've already approved. You've already approved me to make changes to the plan. You've already approved that I can shift districts and buildings back and forth. That's been what our plan has approved since the very beginning. So those are all continuations. The new things are anything you want to do with the tier matrix, extracurricular change on January 6th, and that not requiring asymptomatic non-household. And so if you're truly concerned about the numbers and want to align those together, I would just do them all January. I would reconsider them all for a vote on January 19th. I don't know if that's where the rest of the board is.
I'm not there.
Well, we can find out
Right.
by taking a vote. Would you?
I'll make the motion. Call the question. I'll make the motion.
What are you making a motion for?
What we said to, correct.
Include everything except the bullet that says decision on
Correct.
tier-based data on slide 18. Okay, that was the original thought. So,
Correct.
is there a second? Gonna die for lack of second?
Okay, so we're gonna tie extracurriculars to the school buildings. That's ultimately where we're headed, right? That's where that decision will lie. So if we're optional in the classroom, then we can be optional as a visitor, as a spectator watching a sport.
Well, there's a section, I don't know the answer to your question, that's a board decision, but the answer to your question in practical matter is there is a section on the tiered matrix that gives a specific different for extracurriculars. We were proposing to change that to optional.
Right.
But if
Right,
you
but
wish to make the motion fails, then you are essentially making a decision to tie them together. Yes.
Correct, that's what I'm
So
saying.
Is this participants?
Yes.
Student participants?
And
Well,
And
spectators.
Well,
Correct.
let me to be clear though, active participants don't wear a mask now. If they are actively engaged in the activity, when you go to a basketball game, unless by choice, which there are some students who wear them by choice, they are not required when they're playing basketball, when they are playing an instrument, when they are wrestling on the mat, to wear a mask. The extracurricular change, still same point Dr. Hunter was making, coaches, sidelines, spectators are required per our facility rules and our current rules. If you don't make a change, that will be what we will continue. We would continue while they're in active play, active singing, active musician, active play, all those things that we have formally done, not to wear a mask.
So really, this bullet is change extracurricular events for spectators,
And coaches as well, coaches are required.
optional,
And bench.
And the bench.
and a bench. Meaning
Any non-participating individual.
Yes.
Which means they can if they want to.
We had, like, I was at the game the other night and there were students wearing a mask while actively participating by choice, yes. They may choose.
Well, the original motion died of lack of a second. I can second it. I'll second it. So we have a motion and a second. And that's to do everything except decision on tier-based data. We have a motion and a second. Let's just trying to move this forward here. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Okay. Motion fails. Now, is there a motion? Would you like to make that motion that you were talking about? Which is,
I motion to
probably say consider all the recommendations on the slide with the exception of the tier and the athletics.
Yes,
Would probably
that
be
makes more sense, yes. So I motion to consider the other bullets on slides 18 and 19, except for the extracurricular bullet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, by Mrs. Hernandez. Motion by Dr. Huntsville. Comments or questions?
Yeah, I'm a little bit not clear on what this is now, because I thought they were just gonna come back regardless next week or in 2 weeks. That the only action we were planning to take was on the mass optional for the extracurriculars. And if that failed, they were still gonna come back in 2 weeks with something for us to discuss and vote on.
We're just voting on what we're voting on tonight, right? So 2 weeks from now. We'll vote on.
Is that what this is? It didn't sound that way to me.
I
So
don't
I
want to
just
speak
want some
for
clarity.
Dr. Hunsicker. I think she would like to implement everything except for those 2 bullets was her motion. So she wants to implement, don't come to school when you're sick, being responsive to case counts, giving me the authority to move and pivot on all of the quarantine requirements on slide 19.
How's that
Every-
not where we already were without a motion?
The only thing that is the difference is not a significant difference is the quarantining the asymptomatic. So if her motion, as I understand her to want it, passes, we will, effective January 6th, tomorrow, not require, but recommend asymptomatic non-household contacts. That's
Okay.
essentially the
So
one
that's ultimately
big change
the
that
only, okay.
would happen. She is not supportive of the decision-making
Right.
matrix, which we'll come back to, and the athletics bullet.
So we would be
Correct
accepting,
me, if that's not what you.
Yeah, my only thing is that if we're not going to take action on the matrix tonight and where we want, or and what we want to do about the masking, whether it's we move to tier 2 or we get rid of them and go optional, if we're not gonna take action on that, then I don't believe that we should be taking action on optional masking for extracurricular events, because optically, I think that if we decide to do one thing, but then we say it's okay to do another thing, they don't come together.
Jessica's other option is you could just make a recommendation to accept everything on 19.
You could amend your motion, and amend your motion and just ask the board to accept the recommendations on slide 19 alone, because that's really the only thing that you guys are changing.
All right, I would like to amend my motion to accept everything on slide 19.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Tom Lizer. Comments or questions? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay.
Okay,
Making
so-
progress.
Now back to the other. You would like us to bring you back something to consider for the tiered matrix, and is it the will of the board to do some weighting less of the first 2 matrix or first 2 bullets? Is that what I'm gathering?
Yeah.
Bring back a recommendation to January 19th. I'm asking for the will, is this the will
Are
of the
there any
board?
objections to that thought of separating the first 2 bullets from the last 3 bullets on slide 15? 15.
I'm bringing you back a recommendation on January 19th.
Any
Is that what you
objections to that? Hearing no objections, then that's your direction
Okay.
for
Well,
that.
yes. And do you wish me to bring back the athletic recommendation at the same time?
Yes, slide 18.
May
Okay.
I ask a quick question on extracurricular stuff? Does that include anybody that would use our gym, like NYA stuff and stuff like that?
Yes,
That they would fall under that guideline as well?
yes.
Okay.
And we have limited facility usage only to group 1 and 2, but yes.
Correct.
Okay, I think you have your direction.
I think I do.
So we'll bring this back with the recommendation of the administration to consider those points that we will take a look at in 2 weeks and possibly take action.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the long discussion.
Well,
I'm-
no, it's
believe it's
something we have to do,
necessary.
and it's not an easy decision. It's not black and white. There's so much science out there that contradicts each other, and we didn't even talk about government overreach and that kind of thing, and the right to choose and parents' rights to do what they think is best for their kids. We didn't get into that, which is important as well. So it was a, an hour and a half, 2.5 hours of discussion. I think we understand the plan a lot better, and we'll keep an eye on what's happening and how we can best keep our school open 5 days a week in person. Any other comments before we leave this item? Okay, let's get rid of this. And go to Safe Schools Report. Chief, is that going to be your? Or is that Dr. Sestoli?
No, actually, I get teed up. So every year we have to submit a Safe Schools report to the state. They provide an overall summary. On the board agenda is that Safe Schools report. We also provided a comparative analysis as well. Chief will just touch base on some of the highlights.
Well, as you can see, last year, certainly the numbers are a little bit skewed because of the COVID situation. Coming back this year, we are going to see an increase. I don't want that to be looked upon as suddenly we're going downhill. It's just that we have more kids during the day. We still maintain very good numbers in comparison to other ones. We really have not had any serious problems. As one thing that's been said many times tonight is the kids here are good. And that is true. I mean, our biggest problem are vapes in the bathroom. We're doing very well. And that has been the case. So, at this point in the year, yes, there will be an increase over last year's, but that was to be expected. Because bringing all the kids back 5 days. Really, everything's going in the right direction.
Any questions about the report? It's a routine annual report. Executive comments. Okay. Next item on the agenda is under policy 3.01, Dr. Snowden.
Yes, sir. Throughout the coming months, we'll be bringing forward policies that haven't been reviewed for some time. PSBA recommends that all policies should be reviewed on a board cycle about 7 years. And so the two policies before you tonight, 000 board policy procedure, administrative procedures, and 001 named classifications were last revised in 2008. We've started with the 00s as being the first, and we're just going to start picking through them as best we can in the upcoming months. The policy 000 required minor revisions to bring it up to date with the latest PSBA standard as well as legal references. Policy 001 requires no revision.
And if I could just go back, the first one, Mr. Delco mentioned was the principles for governance and leadership, which is before what Dr. Snowick mentioned. That is just your annual review when new board members come on that you are committing to the principles of governance and leadership, as well as get a new fancy coaster for all of you to sign. So just one before.
Yes, thank you. Any questions on first reading or the principles for governance and leadership? Hearing nothing for second reading and final approval, I have for your consideration policy 006. If the board can recall, this was presented and reviewed by the board and at the November 17th, 2021 board meeting. These revisions were required due to Act 65, which was the latest update to the Sunshine Law. We delayed the second reading in November or December due to an outstanding court case because we believed at the time that it may have impact on this policy and require us to change it again in the near future. So we just kind of paused on it. PSBA has informed us that 006 will not be changing other than what you see before you. So the recommended changes stand, and we're asking for your approval at the regular meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay. Let's keep We'll just keep it on the docket until the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Any questions on 006? Okay, we move on to, we're out of policies. There are no policies to rescind or no information. The water softener 4.01, Art.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We have a water softener system down at our Weisenberg Elementary School that has to be replaced, and this is a nominal fee for Snyder Hoffman Associates. They are our first time we're using them since I'm here. As an engineering firm, we're just gonna have them look at the system and verify that we're doing what's needed. It was reviewed by Jess and is good to go for your approval. If you have questions. That's all.
Any questions for Art? Snyder Hoffman, I've used down at the LCPI quite a bit.
Yeah, they're pretty reputable.
Questions on the water softener? We'll see that in 2 weeks. The Ironton SIP trunks.
Yep, I'll start this and then Dr. Sisnova can certainly start in. If you remember a few years ago, right prior to Dr. Sisnova actually coming on board with us, we started the phone upgrade system where we went around the district and we upgraded the infrastructure lines. Then we went into the process of replacing the phone system with the VoIP system. Right around that time, Dr. Sisnova came on board and we were trying to facilitate the lines coming into the building. We were able to get a PRI line from Verizon at the time, which was the only option available. Since Dr. Sisnova came on board, he was able to upgrade the infrastructure, which I would let him talk about certainly. And we're able to now switch to what's called a SIP trunk locally from Ironton Global. And so this is something that we're looking forward to do. And I'll let Dr. Sisnova talk about the cost savings and what goes along with it.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Oaks. So one good benefit of COVID was that it accelerated our network infrastructure project. So initially, when I first got here, we had a 1 gigabyte backbone out to the internet, and then a 100 meg connection out to Weisenberg that traversed a couple different paths. I'm not going to get real technical with it, but because we had to teach online and virtually using Zoom, we had to increase and update that infrastructure. And that project was discussed at the board level at that point in time back in 2020, and we made all of that happen. As such, we're now able to advance this project much more quickly to realize cost savings. As you know, as you'll hear from Mr. Kish in a minute, you know, we are always looking to reduce cost and save every penny. So by moving to a session initiated protocol, which is what SIP stands for, service, we're basically going to save roughly $35,000 to $40,000 a year on our telephone bill. And that's due to the cost of the physical equipment for Verizon that we lease, as well as the plan which Ironton is providing us. So through the foresight of Mr. Oaks and his team and us being able to get some of these projects done, I think we're going to be able to realize some of these savings sooner than later. So we're asking you for your consideration for this item to move forward so we could realize those cost savings in the near future.
Sounds like an easy one. Anybody have any questions?
I will just add, Mr. Delacour, that there is a full agreement that is in Jess's office, and they're coordinating. So once we have the final legal approval in 2 weeks, hopefully, there should be no issue.
This part of Ironton Phone Company,
I think that's correct.
their technical side of it.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions? Now we'll see this in 2 weeks and take action. Moving on to district finances. Okay, Ryan, you're on.
All right, thank you, everyone. Tonight, I want to provide you with a brief summary to our 2022-23 budget, including an early budget summary, what our Act 1 index is and how it relates to our budget, a recommendation to approve the Act 1 opt-out resolution, and what our plans are moving forward. First, we start with our budget planning, and it's important that we set budget goals. And as we move forward with any budgeting decisions, we always want to ensure that they align with these goals, which have remained consistent with the prior year and include implementing a future-ready comprehensive plan, planning mission, vision, and goals, providing instructional programs to meet Chapter 4 requirements and core content areas and in related arts, providing staffing to meet instructional and operational needs, continuing to commit to long-range technology planning, continuing to support the facilities master plan and ongoing facility needs, developing a budget with short-term and long-term focus to create sustainable funding plan that addresses the challenges of anticipated shortfalls, continuing to identify areas to maximize efficiencies and reduce costs and minimize impact on programs, and providing a funding plan to meet the district needs while minimizing any potential tax increase to taxpayers. So although we're still very early in this process, and the gray column will be your first official look at where we are with our 22-23 budget as of January. These numbers will certainly be refined and changed as we continue working on that. But as an introduction, building and department budgets have overall decreased from prior year by about 0.7%. Salaries have increased 3.2% and benefits have increased almost 7%. The benefit increase is being primarily driven by medical insurance, which is partially a result of the increased costs associated with the pandemic. District-wide grants have an increase of 1.7%. We anticipate increases in gas, heating oil, diesel, and our LCTI contribution, but we were able to scale back on some of our charter school estimates based on enrollment trends. Total revenue, at least for this early budget look, is basically flat. Despite a small increase in assessments, interim and delinquent real estate taxes were adjusted down based on trend. There is also no state budget revenue assumptions for subsidy included at this time. So overall, our budget shows a shortfall of $3,035,096. The district has the ability to generate an additional $1,006,508 in real estate tax revenue, which would bring the shortfall down to $2,028,588. So the Act 1 index dictates how much the district is able to raise taxes without going to vote or referendum or without applying for and receiving exceptions from the state. The base index is calculated by averaging the percent increases in the Pennsylvania statewide average weekly wage and the federal employment cost index for elementary and secondary schools. Our index for the 22-23 school year is 3.4%. This equates to 0.6030 mils and would have a budgetary impact of $1,006,508 and would cost the average taxpayer $132.66 per year. And again, this would be our maximum allowable increase without going to referendum. Based on our preliminary calculations, the district is not eligible to apply for state exceptions. And despite our ability to generate additional real estate tax revenue, we are still projecting a budget shortfall. Between now and our final budget adoption in June, we plan on working to close that budget gap through such things as analyzing staffing and benefits, which includes adjustments to budgeted hours based on trend, along with looking closely at subs and overtime. We'll look for potential attritional savings for retirements, resignations, furloughs if necessary. We're hopeful for encouraging results for our heating oil and diesel bid. We will evaluate our capital reserve transfers and equipment replacement based on our facilities master plan. And this is an annual process that we will be looking at what, if any, adjustments need to be made and what that looks like 3 to 5 years out. Reductions to buildings and departments budgets are still being considered. Although we initially are through this process, we're always looking at more ways to maximize savings. This is a smaller percentage of our overall budget, but one where we sometimes have the greatest control of with our numbers. However, this is also a budget area that affects some of the students the most. And the planned use of our fund balance. So traditionally, the district uses around 1.6 million more or less of fund balance to balance the budget. As we move along with the process, we'll look at and recommend strategies to best utilize our fund balances and how it will impact this budget and future budgets moving forward. So the purpose of this presentation tonight was not only to introduce you to the 22-23 budget, but also provide the board with a recommendation for our January 19th meeting to adopt a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index of 3.4%. This resolution, which is part of your board handouts tonight, is required by PDE and is part of the normal budget process for those districts not going to vote a referendum and who do not qualify for or seek exceptions. It is required to be adopted by January 27th this year, which is 110 days prior to primary elections. So moving forward, we will continue to work on addressing our estimated budgetary shortfall through these previously mentioned target reductions, fund balance use, and other savings. And there's still a tremendous amount of work to accomplish between now and our final budget passing in June. And finally, this is a condensed look at our timeline in our budget process. The action items are shown in red. On January 19th, the board will vote on a resolution not to exceed the index. From now until April, budget planning continues, including staffing meetings and continued board updates. The May 4th workshop, there will be proposed budget presentation, in anticipation of the proposed final budget adoption at the May 11th meeting. And then at our June 1st workshop, there will be a final budget presentation in anticipation of the final budget being adopted at the June 15th meeting. That's all I have. I tried to fly through that for you. If you have any questions? That's nice.
Was good. I love it.
What did you say?
I said that was nice.
That was nice.
Good job.
This is traditionally what you hear in January. This is not unusual for new board members for us to be about $3 million here, give or take, at this point in the budget process. So we're confident that we can trim that over the next few months, as Mr. Kish has said, to bring you something, and we will bring you a future budget presentation, so you obviously can feel comfort. But right now, the process we're through is really the building budgets, and we have lots of staffing decisions, as well as, looking at our substitutes and all the things he mentioned. He mentioned some time bomb things, so like diesel and fuel oil are going to be interesting as we move forward and where that kind of falls. We have been fortunate with cyber charter numbers, so we've been able to pull some numbers from there. Some dollars from there to be able to balance that. But nice job, and we'll continue refining. This would be up for your approval on January 19th, and it is the resolution that is attached to the agenda that you're actually voting on, not to exceed the index.
Yeah, that's the action for 2 weeks from now. 3.4% is Act 1 this year, and we just approved our salary increases of 3.25, and inflation. What's inflation at these days? 5 something, 5, 6. I don't know.
It's up there.
It's going to be a tough year, I think, with inflation entering into. We've got salaries are what, 70% of the budget,
It's about 16, 17 million.
and that's a hair under the Act 1, but all the other stuff, it's going to increase.
I'll correct myself, 20 million, because it's on the slide prior, 20 million.
All right, thank you. Good job.
So Bill, just, this is an important topic, right?
Yeah.
Just so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
To reiterate, and then the way I understand it, we're right now looking at a potential budget shortfall of 3 million. We can raise 1,006,508. Or we can go to referendum and ask the community for a bigger increase. So that, ultimately, that's the decision we have, because for your guidance, we don't qualify for an exception out of the box to get a higher percentage increase. So we're essentially turning it to the community to close this gap, or we would be looking to pull this out of fund balance, which we know it has a short runway to it down the road. So that's the
Good
vote.
summary.
Yep.
Good summary. Any questions? Thank you. Any questions about it?
If we approve this, though, on the 19th, we cannot ask for the referendum, correct?
We don't have to.
Okay,
The only time you need that referendum that Todd was talking about is if you want to exceed the
the
3.4%
3.4,
from Act 1.
okay.
Because there's a deadline just on that point. That's a good point, though. The deadline on the referendum because of the upcoming election cycle. That's the reason why we have to approve this now. If we chose, correct, if we can't reverse course on that referendum if we choose to go this direction.
Yeah,
Correct.
because you have to, go ahead.
Right.
No, go ahead, you know what to go. The proposed final you have to do. Is that
Yeah,
what
we would be scrambling to do the, preliminary budget. It'd be a lot of work.
it's a whole new schedule.
It accelerates your timeline and you have to move for a budget if you wish to do that process, yes.
That schedule that was on the last slide is a much simpler timeline than it would be if you'd exceed the Act 1.
And have we ever gone to referendum, Bill, and yeah.
We have applied for exceptions in the past, probably through 3 or 4 years ago, we were probably applied for a special ed exception to exceed the index. So that's the only two paths by which you can exceed the index. Go to referendum or apply for an index, an exception to the index.
So if we applied for an exception, you're saying you believe we would be declined. I guess the question is that a guarantee or?
Yeah, we ran the numbers, we don't even qualify to
apply.
to apply for them, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? And moving on to 5.02. This is for the prom, huh? The DJ for the prom. We're gonna have a prom this year, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a student activity contract with Big Productions for the DJ services for the class of 2022 prom. To be held on May 29, 2022.
And this comes out of activities fund, right?
Yes.
Any questions about this? We'll take action in 2 weeks. Okay. 503 is Maximum Healthcare staffing. This is the nursing.
Yeah, and Mrs. Edmonds, I ensured this a little earlier that we have an emergency situation we need for nurses, but Mrs. Edmonds is on, I believe, and going to address this.
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Why is that coming through that? Yeah, just speak loudly.
Okay. So the last contract the board approved with Maxim was in 2014. This updated contract reflects rates more closely aligned to current rates within the profession, the professional positions that are listed in attachment A. It also reflects a new name for Maxim. It is now Maxim Healthcare Services. So this will include the other professions within the school setting, such as OT, PT, teachers, paraprofessionals, and other behavior specialist positions, which would allow Northwestern Lehigh to collaborate with Maxim for other sub needs other than just nursing. As Mrs. Holman mentioned just now and earlier, that's an emergency item pursuant to Act 65, and it's mainly due to the demands in our nursing suites in relation to tracking and responding to positive COVID cases that Dr. Sosnovic reviewed earlier. In addition, perhaps these more closely aligned rates will assist us in finding candidates through the agency to alleviate our sub-nursing shortage that we've been really accounting for or encountering now for several years. So with the updated rates, they hopefully will be able to find us some candidates more quickly. If you have any other questions, I could certainly take them.
This is an item we would like your action on tonight, so we don't have to wait any longer for a nursing candidate. We would like it approved per one final word, I believe, being worked out with the solicitor's office. But as soon as that, then we can do the request for a nurse. So we would like this to be an action item this evening if you are comfortable moving it forward. It is an agency we've worked with, as Mrs. Edmonds said. It's just a new contract with a new name and new rates.
Can you just comment on the cost for this staffing compared to a full-time employee?
Yeah, I can get you, well, if you want to prove it tonight, I mean, I can certainly.
Just get an idea.
When we originally did the calculation, when you do benefits and salary together and do the division, it is close because theirs is just an hourly rate. We did that for speech and it was close. A half-time speech person through an agency was close to what we would pay a half-time speech person. This rate is slightly higher. And it's also dependent on what level of employee we get in terms of, you see the differential between RN, LPN, et cetera. Mrs. Edmonds, I don't know if you have a comment different than that on.
That's really accurate. The school nurse there, you're seeing at the $87 per hour are, when we compared that, like you said, Mrs. Holman, to the salary and other benefits to the employee, it was very comparable when we did this speech. It was not as comparable to the school psych, but you'll notice even in this rate, the school psych rates are a little bit even higher. So this will be slightly higher than our current employee, but very close.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for, well, we need a motion. Then we'll take questions. Is there a motion to approve the contract for Maxim Healthcare?
I make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Hernandez, second by Mrs. Scheffler. Comments or questions?
I only have one question on the contract. Maybe this is where you're looking at review is it mentions overtime, and I guess I'm not sure on an hourly rate person, how over, if they could be working for multiple districts, I don't.
They would be paid through the agency, so that would be their cost for overtime. They would need to do that calculation. But if they're working more than 40 hours here, then I'm sure we would pay
Okay,
that.
yeah, just maybe that wording, it doesn't say here, it just says, 3 hours. So if somebody else puts a lot of hours on their plate and they come here and work 3 hours, are you paying time and a half?
Mr. Lander, I can say this is the very first draft of this agreement. It has
Okay.
gone back and forth and been red lines
Okay.
various times. So there have been significant changes that have been made to it.
Any other questions? We do have a motion and a second. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. And anything to highlight on the reports?
Yeah, on your monthly recap report, you'll see that real estate collection rates as of November 2021 are actually running at 93.75%, which is compared to last year at 89.91%, and then the previous year at 93.02%. So final collections will be presented in February and so far look good. EIT revenues lagging slightly from prior year. I think that's more of a issue with reporting and the timing of the reporting. So we should see those numbers jump back ahead in December, so everything else is pretty routine.
Any questions about the reports, which we will receive in 2 weeks? 2 more weeks to look at it. Hey, moving on to all business. We need a carbon lehigh intermediate unit board rep. Has anybody thought about that and would volunteer their services for the
I would like to confirm, but I believe Mrs. Senovitis is still interested, and she is on, if you appoint her there, she is on the next item for approval, as is Dr. Hanson. If you are still both interested in what you expressed interest in. If not, let us know and we can change that before January 19th when you take action.
So you want to take action on the next item,
Well,
approving both of them?
We don't need to do anything till January 19th, but the first one, though, is
Okay.
it's just the unexpired term, if Mrs. Senovitis is still interested. And then the next one, she is on the board committees under the IU. So that one would be the one you would need action on January.
There's no meeting at IU between now
I don't even know that. I can look it up. I don't know
and.
that. though.
Take action tonight.
You can if you like.
Okay, you guys still interested? Okay, we'll take action tonight.
Yeah, get it off the
Yeah, there's a meeting right All right.
Before they change their mind?
That's
Is that what we're
right.
doing?
I would entertain a motion to appoint Jennifer Senovitis as our carbon lehigh intermediate unit rep and Dr. Hunziker as the School Health Advisory Council representative from the board.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Patzinger,
Second.
second by Mrs. Scheffler. Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Congratulations. Thank you for stepping forward. And this brings us, there's no business listed. Is there any no business from the board? None. We will move into courtesy of the floor. Anyone at this time who would like to address the board, please rise and state your name and township with your comments. Yes, sir.
Kevin Bernard, Bacon Road, Burnsville, Harvard Township. I'm not a healthcare professional, father, business owner here at this cause. I just want to remind everyone here what we're dealing with the health that we're talking about, this mask, is a virus. It's not gonna go anywhere. It's not going away. There's gonna be ups, there's gonna be downs. My wife is a teacher at one of the schools where masks are optional. They're not seeing a spike. The kids are being very respectful to each other, respecting each other's decisions of where and not where. I can only correlate to things I know. On cars, we deal with rust. When rust starts, it doesn't go away. It's not something people try to cover it up. Well, we got a new thing, we cover up the rust. They think it's gonna stop it. It doesn't. It just keeps going. I look at a virus almost as the same thing. Once a virus starts, it's gonna move. It's gonna move from people to people. It's gonna take trends. It's gonna take different ways of going about things. It's something that's gonna keep going. It's not gonna go. We're not gonna see COVID go away. It's gonna be another virus that we're gonna see. As far as these, honestly, I feel it should be someone's choice to wear this. It shouldn't be made to wear it. If people are sick, I think they're gonna be smart enough. What I've seen in the past growing up, I mean, I'm not middle-aged. People are pretty respectful of other people. If they're sick, they usually stay home. At least they should. They stay home. They shouldn't be made to do something. It shouldn't be made to stay home. It shouldn't be made to wear a mask. It should be a choice. It should be a parent's choice for the children. As far as liking the mask or not liking the mask for the children, my children like certain foods. They like candy. They don't like the Brussels sprouts. My choice as a parent to make that choice what they're going to. Secondly, I want to say I like what the officer pointed out as far as the safety numbers of last year versus this year. We look at, there was a chart up here as far as the COVID numbers from last year to this year. Well, look how high they are this year. Well, there's double the kids. They're here double the time. Just like the officer said about the safety numbers. Don't look at this year as being really bad. These kids aren't bad. It's just that they're here now more. And there's twice as many of them here. So we really should take that into respect, those numbers from one thing to another. You know, the COVID numbers as well. Just look at those numbers. But also, Mr. Hernandez pointed out the percentages. I run a business. I look at numbers every day. I look at percentages every day. If you look at percentages, the numbers are, the percentages are really not all that high. What we're seeing. But there's these charts that make things look, oh, this is skyrocketing, super high. We really look at the numbers. Look at in your own charts, you had how many numbers there were for how many kids were in each building. It's like 20 some versus 3,400 in the building. 5 minutes maybe up. I'm sorry, I took extra time. But I just want to clarify, this is a virus. It's not going to go away. We're going to be dealing with this, whether we have these or not. I won't say which school my wife's at because that's her liberty to say. But I will say, she said it's not spiking. They're not having teacher problems. They pulled her. She's one of the first to be pulled in other classrooms because she's a specialist as a substitute. I, as her spouse, hear it when they pull her. I'm the first one to probably hear it. I haven't heard it much lately. And she said, no, I haven't been pulled much. I texted her while we were in this meeting. So no, it really hasn't been that bad. As far as the kids being pulled out of classrooms, it really hasn't been that bad. So I just want to put that into your hands for making future decisions. I appreciate you guys. What you do is hard. I want to congratulate the new members and thank the existing members for everything you guys do.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Warren. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Jonathan Bosniak, 2659 Post Road, Warfield, Low Hill Township. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the lengthy discussion, which I hope continues to move the school in this district in a direction where we allow choice. You guys have heard from me, so I think you know where I stand. I won't elaborate on any of that. The only other thing that I would suggest or ask that you think about is in the tiered criteria, the last bullet about the vaccination rate. I know the data is a little bit aged, and I think there was some conversation about what the vaccination rate is through the age groups. You know, now that we have another couple of weeks under our belt, But I would ask you to think about how we weight that part of the criteria. I think it could be viewed as kind of dangling a carrot out in front of the community and the parents. It's, you know, if you don't do this, you're not going to get to the tier that you want to be in. So I would just ask you to think about that as we're reviewing the criteria. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Anyone else?
Jennifer Habelka, 6070 Shortport, Germanville, Everett Township. I just want to say about extracurricular activities, especially basketball. I was there 2 weeks ago. Nobody on the benches, nobody on the players, no other refs were wearing the masks. And it was against the Lehigh. People in the stands had to wear masks. I don't understand that at all because you can sit 6 feet apart from people. And the refs are running down the court right by you, no masks. The players are running right by you, no masks. I don't understand why the parents, the people in the stands have to wear masks. I don't think the masks work. I mean, my mom just passed away from COVID. She had underlying health conditions. That's what happens. Older people get it and they can pass away from it. It doesn't hurt the kids. I had it last year. I didn't get sick. I had a sinus infection and I'm diabetic. So that's my take on it.
And I also work in daycare and I see the kids that are like 2 to 5 crying because they don't want to wear a mask.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else?
Hi, Jesse Mauer, 8536, Moore Lane, Weisenberg. Happy New Year. Thank you for the whole discussion tonight. Like they were saying, it was good to hear you guys really kind of going around the room and talking about it. So that was really good to hear. I guess the only little tidbit to throw out there is in terms of like trying to forecast moving forward, because I know everyone's really concerned about staying open. And it looks like we've got like a little buffer there, like we kind of teeter in between the like 2 to 3.4, I think was the highest number of percentage of cases that was mentioned in one of the schools right now. And so maybe it peaks up and gets up to 4, but you know, there's a good chance that we stay kind of that 2.5, 2 range. That's a lot of room, unfortunately, to just say for people to get COVID. So there's this idea, I kept thinking of Kerplunk, I don't know if anybody played the game Kerplunk with the marbles and all the little sticks are in there. And I feel like we think that we've got one last stick in there holding all the marbles up and that stick is the mask. And if we pull it out, suddenly it's just like everything's gonna go bananas and we're gonna burst over 5. But what if you took a chance, you pulled the stick out and maybe all the marbles didn't drop and you stayed below 5? Or what if you could get the reward of, let's say like Groundhog's Day, February 2nd, going optional. The whole rest of the year, the kids can make that choice with their parents. And maybe the school got shut down for, you know, different schools got closed down for, let's say, maximum 14 days. Because it doesn't sound like you're gonna get a full block of 14 from how things went last year. Like the way the numbers rolled, it sounds like you might be shut down for 4 or 5. It's not gonna be like, boom, you're done for a whole 2 weeks. But let's say worst case scenario, each school went through a 14-day closure, but the whole rest of the year from February on, the kids were optional. Is that a nicer enough reward for that consequence, or is that consequence so horrible that we don't want to try to like attain that reward? You know, by taking the mask off. Since we don't know what stick it really is. Is it the big stick dropping? Just like a thought of, is it worth taking the chance to see what happens? Or is that too dangerous?
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, all good points from everyone this evening. Thank you for coming. And it's a complicated, difficult decision. I don't know if there's a right answer to it or not. But we'll move on and we'll see what it looks like in 2 weeks. See what the numbers look like in 2 weeks and put all this in the pot and stir it up and see what comes out. Okay, thank you for coming. Let's see. We do have an executive session for personnel immediately following this evening. And With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Patsy.
Second.
Second by Mr.